Hello everyone, I am your storyteller, here to guide you through a story that will keep you awake, even if you're trying to fall asleep. Before we begin, please support me by liking and subscribing to my channel. And let me know, where are you watching from and what time is it? Now, sit back, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for what lies beyond the veil of normal reality. The moment I pulled away the moth-eaten cloth from the object in the attic, I should have stopped. I should have turned around, covered it back up, and walked away from Thornfield Estate forever. But some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Some reflections should remain forever hidden in shadow. Thornfield had come to me like a ghost from my past, an inheritance from a great aunt, Martha Thornfield, a woman shrouded in family whispers and silence. She was the black sheep, the recluse who never left her decaying Victorian mansion that crouched like a malignant toad over acres of untamed Massachusetts forest. When the lawyer handed me the heavy iron keys, his eyes flickered with relief, as though the house itself was a burden too dark to bear. He mentioned the house had stood empty for 3 months after her death. What he never told me was how the floorboards groaned beneath my feet, as if the house itself mourned or warned, or worse, remembered. The walls seemed to lean in when I wasn't watching, pressing closer like breath on my neck. On the first 2 days, I tried to dismiss the shadows darting at the edges of my vision, the whispering drafts that stirred with no wind, the sudden chill that slipped under my skin. But the attic was different. The narrow staircase leading there was cloaked in silence so thick it felt like a shroud. The stale air hung heavy with dust, and pale light spilled through a single grimy window, illuminating boxes piled like forgotten tombs. Sheets draped over furniture looked like ghostly sentinels watching me. In the furthest corner stood a tall, dark shape wrapped in brittle, ancient rope. My fingers trembled as I untied the bindings. The rope snapped, releasing a scent, like old flowers long dead, mixed with something rotten, something organic that crawled under my skin. When the cloth fell away, there stood a mirror, tall and imposing, framed with ornate silver thorns and roses twisted into grotesque patterns that seemed to writhe when I wasn't looking directly. But the reflection was what truly chilled me. I saw myself, but something was terribly wrong. When I raised my hand, my reflection hesitated, a moment too long, a shadow of delay that set my heart pounding. It was as if the man in the mirror was a stranger, disconnected from my will. The room behind the reflected me began to warp. Shadows stretched where none should be, boxes appeared and vanished in impossible rearrangements, and the air itself seemed thicker, darker. I spun around to look at the attic, but everything was unchanged, silent, still, real. Yet when I faced the mirror again, the warped images dissolved, leaving only my pale, sweating self staring back. My throat tightened with dread. The taste of cold metal filled my mouth. This was no trick of light. This was a window into something beyond understanding, something that was waiting patiently in the darkness for me to see. The wise choice would have been to leave. To turn my back and never look back again. But something invisible held me fast, rooted in place before that impossible reflection, a hypnotic force pulling me deeper into the mirror's haunting grip. Time lost all meaning. Minutes melted into hours, stretching and compressing like twisted taffy around me. Then, out of the shimmering depths of the reflected attic, I saw her. A figure, a woman, elderly and gaunt, emerged at the edge of the mirror's vision. She moved with stiff, jerky motions, like a marionette tangled in broken strings, searching frantically. Her fingers clawed at dusty boxes, her eyes darted into shadowed corners with desperate urgency. Her mouth moved silently, forming a wordless call that never reached my ears beyond the glass. Heart hammering, I spun around, breath ragged and loud in the silent attic behind me. But the space was empty, save for the dust motes dancing lazily in the wan light. I turned back, and there she was still, closer now. Her face was a grotesque distortion of the photographs I'd seen of Aunt Martha. Elongated, stretched, like an image warped by an old television set. Her wild eyes searched, frenzied, as if haunted by some terrible secret. She wasn't alone. The reflection twisted further, the attic morphing into a nightmare landscape. Walls bent and shifted, the lone grimy window multiplying, 3, 5, impossible numbers, casting jagged, unnatural shadows. Boxes rearranged themselves into impossible configurations that defied physics and sense. More figures appeared, phantoms moving through this warped world, men and women in clothes from long-forgotten eras. They scoured the reflected space with the same frantic desperation. Faces I recognized from faded family photos, relatives long dead, mingled with unknown specters, their hollow eyes hungry, predatory, searching for something or someone. A man in a Civil War uniform turned suddenly, locking eyes with me through the glass. His gaze was fierce, raw with rage and despair. He reached out, hand pressing flat against the mirror's surface from his side. His mouth opened in a silent scream that echoed through my mind. Then his hand was breaking through. The glass bulged outward like rubber stretched too thin. The mirror's surface rippled, and I felt the air shift, heavy and oppressive, as if something beyond the glass was clawing to cross over. A strangled cry escaped me, echoing in the attic as I stumbled backward. My legs betrayed me, collapsing beneath the weight of terror. Knees scraped raw against the rough wooden floor, the sting grounding me, anchoring me to a reality I no longer trusted. I looked up. The mirror was silent again. Only my pale, terrified reflection stared back at me in an attic that appeared normal once more. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. If anything, it tightened around me like a noose. Hours passed, but exhaustion and dread warred in my mind. I forced myself to busy my hands with mundane tasks, sorting old papers, checking creaky electrical systems, anything to avoid facing the attic, the mirror, the horrors lurking just beyond sight. Yet my eyes betrayed me, drawn again and again to the ceiling, to the attic above. That night, lights blazing in every room, I lay awake in the master bedroom. From somewhere above came slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth across the attic floor. My rational mind whispered explanations, old wood settling, thermal expansion, creaks of an aging house. But deep inside, I knew better. They were up there. Searching. Waiting. Sleep fled me. The next morning, hollow-eyed and trembling from too much coffee and too little rest, I climbed the narrow stairs again. This time, with resolve hardening in my chest. I would cover the mirror. Maybe even remove it from the house entirely. Because some reflections should never be seen. Some doors should remain forever closed. But when I reached the top of the stairs, the cloth that once covered the mirror was no longer draped over it. Instead, it lay folded with unsettling precision over a nearby chair, as if placed there by invisible hands. The mirror itself stood bare, its surface unnaturally bright, reflecting the morning light with a clarity that seemed wrong, too sharp, too vivid, as if it pierced beyond the glass. And in that terrifying clarity, I saw them. Dozens of figures crowded the impossible space behind the glass. Some stood rigid, others knelt with faces pressed desperately against the mirror's surface from within. All eyes were fixed on me with an aching hunger that clawed at my sanity. Their mouths moved in perfect unison. Though no sound emerged from the mirror, I read their lips with chilling certainty. They were saying my name. The realization crashed into me like a tidal wave. This was no random haunting. No vague, aimless spirit. They knew me. They had been waiting for me. For this moment. Everything snapped into terrible focus, the inheritance, Aunt Martha's sudden death, the lawyer's eager hands as he passed me the keys. They were all threads in a dark design woven long before I ever set foot in Thornfield. The figures stirred, agitation rippling through the reflected crowd. Fingers pointed accusingly, faces twisting into grotesque masks of rage and desperation. The Civil War soldier reappeared, pressing both hands flat against the glass. The mirror bowed outward once again, flexing as if straining to break. But what came next shattered my remaining reason. From the crowd of desperate faces, my own reflection stepped forward. Not a warped doppelganger, not a distorted echo, but me, wearing the same tired clothes, the same stubble, the same haunted eyes. Yet this other self moved independently, turning to face the masses behind him in that shadowy mirror world. And then he smiled. But it was not my smile. Cold, calculating, and filled with a cruel knowing, an expression I had never worn and never could. The reflection turned back toward me, hand pressed to the glass. His lips parted in two words that seared into my mind. Found you. I fled. Down the attic stairs, through the twisting halls, and out into the cold gray morning of Massachusetts. I didn't stop running until my car door slammed shut behind me. I didn't stop driving until I was 3 states away, heart pounding and breath ragged. The house stands empty now, or so I believe. I never returned. Never even arranged to sell the cursed property. But sometimes, in quiet moments when the world falls silent, I find myself watching my reflection differently. Searching for that telltale flicker, the infinitesimal delay, that sign it might no longer be mine. Because I know. They found what they were looking for. And somewhere beyond the silver glass, my other self still waits, that terrible smile lingering like a poison in the dark. The worst part? Knowing he watches. Knowing he waits. But even darker is the truth I fear to admit. Sometimes, when I am tired or distracted, I catch myself smiling back. Story 2. The city's veins pulse differently after midnight. Streetlights flicker like dying neurons, casting fractured shadows that writhe and breathe. For 3 years, I have driven these midnight arteries, carrying drunks, insomniacs, and desperate souls through the hours when honest people sleep. But tonight feels different. Wrong. Like the very air has thickened with malice. My phone buzzes against the dashboard. Another ride request. The notification glows an eerie blue in my peripheral vision. I glance down, and my blood freezes. The pickup address is 1847, Elmwood Lane. A house I know no longer exists. I've driven past that dead end countless times. The place where a house burned to ash 2 years ago, leaving only blackened foundations and a twisted mailbox. I tap decline. My thumb lingers over the screen longer than it should, as if the phone might snap back. The clock reads 2:17 a.m. The city feels emptier than usual. Even the distant hum of traffic is muffled, like the world is holding its breath. The phone buzzes again. The same address. 1847, Elmwood Lane. My heart skips. I decline again, faster this time. The screen glowed again, 1847, Elmwood Lane. My fingers hovered nervously, trembling despite myself. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, some cruel joke by the app or a prank from someone who knew the stories. But even as I dismissed the thought, a cold weight settled in my chest. That address wasn't just an old, burned-out house. It was a scar on this city, a wound that refused to heal. People whispered about the night it burned. The screams that echoed from the ruins. The family that vanished without a trace. The tales were hushed, spoken only in shadows and half-glances. But the fear was real. The kind of fear that clings to your skin, seeps into your bones. I swallowed hard and finally locked my phone. The city outside was unnervingly still. The usual hum of life had died down to a ghostly whisper. I felt eyes on me, unseen watchers lurking just beyond the reach of the streetlights. A sudden chill crept through the cab as if the darkness outside had slipped inside with me. I shook my head, trying to focus on the road, on the steady rhythm of the engine. But the sense of wrongness didn't fade. Then, the rearview mirror caught something, movement in the back seat. A fleeting shadow that vanished when I blinked. My breath hitched. I told myself it was fatigue, tricks of light and shadow playing games in my mind. But the city's heartbeat was changing. Faster. Louder. Then my phone buzzed once more. This time, the screen was black. No address, no name, only a single word scrolling slowly across the display. Come. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The word was an invitation, or a summons. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. The logical part of me screamed to drive away, to flee the city and never look back. But something deeper, a dread curiosity, pulled me toward the destination I'd sworn to avoid. I started the car, my hands tight on the wheel, and headed for Elmwood Lane. The street was narrower than I remembered, lined with skeletal trees whose branches scratched at the sky like desperate fingers. The remains of the burned house loomed at the end of the road, not a structure anymore, but a gaping hollow filled with shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I parked a safe distance away and stepped out into the cold night air. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by the faint whisper of wind through the ruins. A sudden crack echoed behind me. I spun, heart thudding, but saw nothing, only the empty street stretching into darkness. Then I saw it, an old, charred mailbox, crooked and half buried in the earth. Attached to it was a faded photograph, the edges singed as if caught in the fire but somehow spared. I picked it up, hands trembling. The picture showed a smiling family, 2 adults and a child. Their eyes seemed to follow me, filled with a sorrow so profound it crushed my chest. A voice whispered behind me, soft, barely more than a breath. "Come home." I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what might be there. But I knew I had already crossed a threshold. Elmwood Lane was no longer just an address. It was a doorway. And something on the other side was waiting for me. The whisper lingered in the chilled air, curling around me like smoke, an invitation and a warning tangled together. I wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of my car, but my feet moved forward of their own accord, as if the night itself was guiding me deeper into the void. The ruins of the house yawned before me, a hollow skeleton of charred beams and crumbling stone. The smell of smoke and something darker, older, rose from the earth, twisting with the cold night air. It was the scent of memories long burned, secrets buried beneath ash and shadow. As I stepped closer, the ground beneath me seemed to pulse, soft like the skin of a living thing. My breath hitched as a subtle vibration thrummed through the soles of my boots, a heartbeat, slow and uneven, but unmistakably alive. Then the shadows began to move. Not with the erratic flicker of wind-blown leaves, but with purpose. They stretched and writhed, coalescing into shapes, twisted figures half seen at the edges of sight, faces just out of focus. A low moan rose from the darkness, sorrowful and ragged, echoing from the depths of something ancient. The air thickened, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a labor. I blinked, and suddenly I was no longer alone. 2 figures emerged from the gloom, a man and a woman, their forms blurred and translucent, like reflections in disturbed water. Their eyes were deep wells of pain, their mouths moving silently, mouthing words I could not hear but felt in my soul. They reached out, hands trembling, fingers brushing the air with desperate longing. Their presence was overwhelming, a flood of loss and regret that threatened to drown me. I tried to speak, but my voice was a whisper lost in the night. "Who are you?" They didn't answer. Instead, the woman pointed beyond me, to the hollow where the house had stood. I turned, heart pounding, and saw faint shapes moving in the ruins, shadows flickering like ghosts dancing in the firelight of a past long extinguished. Images flooded my mind, snatches of memories not my own, a child's laughter turning to screams, doors slamming, whispered threats carried on the wind, and a terrible fire that swallowed all hope. The man's eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly I understood. They were trapped. Souls bound to this place by violence and despair, caught between worlds, searching for release. But release came at a price. As I watched, the shadows thickened, pulling at me like invisible chains. The ruins seemed to breathe, walls collapsing inward not with stone and wood, but with intent, folding the night around me like a coffin. Panic surged, but my legs refused to move. Then a new presence joined them, something darker, colder, a silhouette without a face, exuding a malevolent hunger. It moved silently among the trapped spirits, feeding on their anguish, growing stronger with each torment. It turned toward me. I felt its gaze, sharp as ice, searing through my flesh and bone. A voice echoed in my mind, ancient and cruel. You came. Now you belong. A sudden blast of cold air shattered the moment, and I stumbled backward, breaking the invisible bonds. The night fell silent once more. I found myself alone, trembling in the empty street, clutching the singed photograph. But I knew the truth. Elmwood Lane was a prison, and I had been drawn into its endless night. And the thing that waited there was patient. Watching. Waiting. Hungry for the next soul brave, or foolish, enough to answer its call. Days blurred into restless nights. Sleep was elusive, haunted by dreams thick with smoke and shadow. The photograph I carried felt heavier with each passing hour, as if the sorrow of those lost souls seeped into the paper, bleeding into my thoughts. I began to notice subtle changes around me. Reflections in windows that lingered too long, glimpses of movement just beyond the edge of vision. A whisper of a voice calling from empty rooms. The kind of presence that unsettles the skin and stirs the breath in your chest. Driven by a need I could neither understand nor resist, I returned to the local archives, desperate to unravel the history that clung to Elmwood Lane like a shroud. What I uncovered was a tapestry woven with tragedy and cruelty, a family torn apart by secrets, accusations of dark rituals whispered in hushed tones, a child vanished the night of the fire, and neighbors who spoke of strange lights and mournful cries that never ceased. Among the brittle pages, I found a faded journal, its worn leather cover etched with symbols that prickled my skin. The handwriting inside was frantic, the words smeared with tears or perhaps blood. It spoke of a pact made in desperation, of an entity bound to the land, feeding on grief and fear. The final entry chilled me to my core. The barrier thins. Soon, the world of the living and the damned will touch. Prepare, for those who cross are forever changed. That night, the shadows came alive with a hunger I could no longer deny. Shapes moved in the corners of every room. The air grew thick and cold, suffocating. I could feel the unseen eyes watching, judging, waiting for a moment of weakness. And then I saw it, a figure, tall and silent, standing just beyond the veil of reality, its face a void that swallowed light. It reached out, not with hands, but with whispers that wrapped around my mind, promising release and despair in the same breath. I realized then that I was not just a visitor to this nightmare. I was a part of it. Bound by the legacy of Elmwood Lane, tethered to a darkness older than memory. And the choice was no longer mine. The following days were a blur of fevered research and restless nights, each moment suffused with an ever-thickening shadow. The journal's cryptic warnings echoed in my mind, a refrain that threaded itself into every corner of my waking life. I could no longer distinguish the line between reality and nightmare. Driven by a mixture of dread and desperate hope, I returned to Elmwood Lane as dusk fell, the sky bleeding shades of deep purple and ashen gray. The ruins awaited, a silent maw of memories and despair. But this time, I came armed with knowledge, and a determination to confront the darkness rather than flee it. The air was heavy, saturated with the scent of char and cold earth. As I stepped toward the heart of the ruins, the shadows coalesced, whispering voices swirling in a spectral dance around me, fragments of grief and rage entwined with a sorrowful melody. From the depths emerged the tall, faceless figure. It was no longer distant. It moved with deliberate purpose, its presence chilling the blood in my veins. I felt the tendrils of its influence, subtle but unyielding, clawing at my thoughts. Why do you come? The voice was a hollow echo within my mind, both everywhere and nowhere. To end this, I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute. A cold laugh rippled through the air, a sound that seemed to fracture the very fabric of the night. You cannot undo what was wrought in blood and despair. But you may choose your path. Before me shimmered a threshold, a veil between worlds, quivering with unstable energy. Beyond it, flickers of light and shadow hinted at the realm where trapped souls wandered, and where the curse took root. The journal's words surged through me, prepare, for those who cross are forever changed. Heart pounding, I stepped forward, crossing into the reflection of Elmwood Lane, a mirror realm twisted and haunted by every sorrow and secret buried beneath the ashes. There, among the distorted echoes of the past, I would face the spirits bound in torment, the malevolent entity that fed on their anguish, and the terrible truth that linked us all. In this fractured world, the struggle for freedom would begin. But at what cost? The moment I crossed the threshold, the world shifted beneath my feet like a fragile glass sculpture trembling on the edge of shattering. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of smoke and cold stone, and shadows clung to every surface like living things. Elmwood Lane was no longer the street I had known but a warped echo, a nightmare reflection where time folded upon itself and memories bled into the present. The ruins stretched endlessly, consumed by twisting vines that whispered forgotten names and fractured laughter. From the depths emerged the trapped souls, their faces pale and eyes hollow, glimmering with a flicker of hope mingled with despair. They reached out with trembling hands, their voices a haunting chorus pleading for release. And beyond them, the faceless entity awaited, a void of hunger and malice that pulsed like a dark heartbeat in the center of this spectral world. As I advanced, the entity's voice thundered inside my mind, "You cannot save them. They are mine." But I pressed forward, clutching the journal tightly, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. The ground beneath me cracked, revealing glimpses of the past, a child's laughter that turned to screams, the fire that consumed the home, the whispered pact forged in desperation. Each vision seared itself into my soul, testing my resolve. Then came the trial. A doorway appeared, forged from molten glass and thorn silver, the boundary between despair and hope. To pass, I had to confront the darkest corners of my own soul, the fears, regrets, and shadows I'd long buried. The entity whispered temptations, weaving illusions of surrender and peace. But amidst the chaos, a single truth anchored me: the legacy I inherited was not a curse to accept but a burden to break. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped through the doorway. Light flooded the realm, shattering shadows, and the trapped souls began to rise, freed from their chains. The faceless void screamed, a soundless wail that dissolved into the ether. I awoke on Elmwood Lane, dawn painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. The ruins were silent, peaceful. And somewhere deep within me, a cold smile faded, replaced by a fragile, enduring hope. The morning light filtered through the skeletal trees, soft and golden, yet it felt out of place on Elmwood Lane. The ruins were still there, charred and crumbling, but the weight in the air had shifted. The ever-present tension, the suffocating gloom, gone. Or mostly gone. I stood in silence, my breath visible in the cool dawn. The photograph I once carried had turned to ash in my pocket, disintegrating the moment I crossed the veil. A symbol, perhaps, that something had been released. Or taken. But as I stepped away from the ruins, a strange unease clung to me like cobwebs. Not fear, not anymore, but an emptiness I hadn't expected. I had crossed into a realm that doesn't forgive trespassers, and though I had returned, I could feel the mark it left on me. Something fundamental had shifted. Back in the city, I tried to return to life as it was before. But life no longer fit. Mirrors still unsettled me. I avoided their gaze. In moments of exhaustion, I would catch a flicker, a delayed blink, a second reflection. Sometimes, I would see her. The woman from the mirror, Aunt Martha, watching from some distant place, her face calm, resigned, proud, maybe. Or warning me. The journal was gone, vanished without a trace, but its words remained etched in memory. And more than once, in the stillness of my apartment, I would find pages on my desk written in that same frantic, looping hand, even though I never picked up a pen. The dreams returned, too. But they were not dreams of fire or shadow. They were dreams of doors, endless doors standing upright in vast fields of fog. Behind each one, a different version of Elmwood Lane. Different endings. Different choices. And I always wake up standing in front of one door, slightly ajar, the faceless figure waiting just beyond, whispering, another path. I have not crossed that door. Not yet. But I know that the mirror realm is not destroyed. It is watching still, waiting in silence. The entity may have lost its grip on Elmwood Lane, but it exists still, patient, curious, and always hungry. And deep inside me, something watches too. Something changed by the crossing. And sometimes, when I walk past windows at night, I catch a glimpse not of my reflection, but of him. The other me. Still smiling. Still waiting. I freeze. Every muscle in my body locks tight as if cold fingers have wrapped around my spine. The breath, that phantom breath, is gone in an instant, but its presence lingers like frostbite. I stare straight ahead, unwilling to look again into the rearview mirror. The back seat, still bathed in cold, flickering light, remains visibly empty. And yet, I know I'm not alone. The radio cuts out completely now, replaced by a sound I can't place. Not static. Not silence. But something, in between. Like a heartbeat echoing inside a cavern too deep to see the bottom of. The name on the GPS stares up at me, 666, Shadow Drive. I whisper it out loud, and the word shadow feels heavy in my mouth, as though saying it invites something ancient and waiting. I don't remember tapping anything, but the car begins to move again, my foot pressing gently on the accelerator, guided not by thought but by inevitability. The streets are different now. There are no other cars. No people. No signs of the city I know. The world outside the windows looks washed out, like an old VHS tape left too long in the sun. Colors are muted. Shapes bend wrong. And above me, the stars are gone, replaced by a low-hanging fog that ripples like something alive. Each street I pass grows less familiar. Houses melt into one another, trees twist in impossible directions. My headlights reveal glimpses of things moving between them, too fast, too misshapen to be human. And always the sense that I'm being followed. Or led. The GPS dings again. Approaching destination. But I'm not approaching anything. The road has vanished beneath the tires. It's become a narrow gravel path surrounded by gnarled forest. My headlights catch movement, branches that sway without wind, eyes that glint and disappear, shapes that shiver in the spaces between what's visible and what isn't. And then, the car stops. Not because I pressed the brakes. It just refuses to move forward. The path ends here. There is no house. No driveway. Just an opening in the woods, choked with fog and pulsing with a darkness that breathes. I grip the wheel so tightly my knuckles ache. But the app chimes again, a new message, written in all caps. Passenger departed. Thank you. My breath catches. I twist around, slower this time. The back seat is still empty. But the door is open. Not wide. Just barely ajar. Enough to let something out. Or in. The air inside the car grows unbearably still. Not quiet, just still, like the moment before a scream or the hush before a siren. The dome light flickers. Then dies. And then, from the trees, movement. A figure. Tall. Unmoving. Its face isn't a face at all. Just a smooth, reflective surface, like a mirror. And in it, I see myself. Not the self I know. Not the self who fled Elmwood Lane. But him. That smile again. Cold. Patient. Eternal. He lifts a hand, and from behind my ear, the voice returns. Not a whisper this time. Not even words. Just laughter. Low. Rattling. Triumphant. The laughter echoes long after it fades, like a memory refusing to die. I grip the steering wheel with both hands, but it feels useless, like holding a rope while already in free fall. The figure doesn't move. It just is. Standing at the forest's edge, tall and still, its mirror face reflecting back not only my face, but my fear. Behind him, more figures begin to appear. Slowly. One by one. Each of them, a reflection. Of me. Different versions, some older, some younger, some wearing expressions I've never worn. One with a bleeding eye. One burned black on one side. One grinning from ear to ear with teeth that never end. They stand in the dark like a congregation of selves, birthed from every bad decision I never made and every road I never turned away from. And then, all at once, they step forward. I slam the car into reverse, tires screeching as I tear back down the gravel path. The branches claw at the car's sides, screaming like fingernails on glass. The GPS has lost its mind. The screen flickers violently, glitching between streets that don't exist. Every direction reads, "No way out." My phone buzzes violently in the cup holder. I don't dare look. I keep driving. But the road has changed again. I'm no longer in the city. I'm not even sure I'm on Earth. The trees have no leaves. Their trunks spiral upward like smoke. The sky bleeds a dull crimson. Shadows skitter beside me on all fours, their faces obscured by static, like corrupted files in a broken memory. And ahead, a building. Alone. Tall. Old. Not a house this time. A motel. Its neon sign flickers erratically, "Vacancy, we remember you." I stop the car. Not because I want to. But because the engine dies, sputtering once, then going utterly still. Everything around me is silent again. Even the shadows have vanished. Even the reflections. I step out. The gravel crunches beneath my feet, too loud, like walking on bones. The motel doors creak open on their own. A bell chimes from within. And then. The voice. Familiar now. From behind me, just above my right ear. "We're home." I don't turn. I can't. But in the glass of the motel window, I see my reflection. Not just one. Thousands. All smiling. All waiting. The air inside the motel is colder than it should be. It smells faintly of mildew, scorched hair, and old dreams. The wallpaper curls away from the walls like it's trying to escape. Dim yellow lights flicker above, but their glow doesn't seem to reach very far, as if the shadows are too thick, too hungry. A long hallway stretches out before me, lined with doors. Each one painted deep red, each one with a tarnished brass number plate. But the numbers aren't in sequence. They aren't even in order. Room 1. Room 314. Room 0. Room 9B. Room Infinity. My breath fogs with each exhale. I'm not shivering. But I should be. On the wall behind the check-in desk hangs a cracked mirror. In it, the reflection of the hallway is empty. I look back over my shoulder, the hallway is still there, stretching behind me. But in the mirror, no hallway. Only a wall. There is no receptionist. No concierge. No answers. Only a rusted key hanging from a hook with a room number etched in blood-dark ink, room 33. My hand moves without my consent. I take the key. The hallway swallows me as I walk, each step muffled, each door I pass whispering my name in voices I almost recognize, my own, but twisted. Panicked. Or laughing. Or sobbing. Or silent. When I find room 33, the door is already unlocked. It opens without resistance. Inside. A room identical to my childhood bedroom. Every detail perfect. The Batman bedspread. The cracked ceiling tile. The drawing on the wall I did when I was 6, of a monster that hides in mirrors. My heart thunders. There's something sitting on the bed. It's a version of me. Age 12. Pale. Thin. Eyes wide. He looks up and says, softly. You left me here. I stagger back, hit the wall, but the room doesn't vanish. The boy stands, his expression sad but resolute. You forgot what happened that night. You made yourself forget. The memories return not like a flood, but like a knife. Slowly sliding in. The night I stared too long into the mirror. The way my reflection moved on its own. The sound of something clicking behind the glass. The dream I had, but it wasn't a dream, of being pulled through, of something being left behind. That was the first exchange. And room 33 is the ledger. Suddenly, every door in the hallway slams open. Voices pour out. Screaming. Whispering. Pleading. Chanting. Laughing. All me. Fragments of every version I might have been. Every bad decision. Every swallowed rage. Every regret I never confronted. And from the far end of the hallway, something comes walking. Not running. Not charging. Just walking. Steady. Inevitable. The mirror-faced man. He carries no weapon. He doesn't need one. Because he carries me. All of me. Every echo. Every shadow. Every forgotten guilt. And as he comes closer, I realize. This motel isn't for staying. It's for reckoning. I slam the door to room 33 shut behind me, but it doesn't make a sound. Sound itself seems to have thinned in this place, as if even the vibrations of the living world struggle to exist here. I can feel him approaching. The mirror-faced man. The collector of selves. Each step he takes down the hallway is slow, deliberate. Like a clock counting down to the moment I cease to be just one man, and become a reflection added to his silent legion. I clutch the old key in my hand, fingers white-knuckled. The tarnished tag swings slightly, revealing something I hadn't noticed before, etched faintly on the back. Key opens more than one door. The boy, the 12-year-old version of me, is gone now. Only his echo remains in the mirror across the room, where he stands still, watching me with eyes that beg for release. I open the door. The hallway outside has changed again. It's longer. Much longer. Endless, perhaps. And at the very far end, past rows of impossible door numbers, past flickering lights that now pulse like a dying heartbeat, is a door made of dark glass. Room infinity. The key grows warm in my hand. As I walk, the voices behind each door grow louder. I hear versions of myself in every permutation. The one who never left his hometown. The one who hurt people he loved. The one who didn't survive Elmwood Lane. And worse, I hear them pleading. Bargaining. Begging to be forgotten. Room infinity stands before me now, massive and smooth, pulsing with dark energy. I insert the key. It fits perfectly. And as the lock turns, everything stops. The hallway disappears. Time collapses. And I step into nothingness. Except, it's not empty. It's full. So full it's silent. Still. Like the moment before a scream. A vast, obsidian void stretches in all directions, and suspended in the black are mirrors, infinite mirrors, floating in space like stars. Each one holds a version of me. Some are monstrous. Some are broken. Some look exactly like me now, but blink a second too late. And at the center of them all, waiting on a floorless stage of darkness, is him. The mirror-faced man. He turns slowly. But this time, he has a face. Mine. But it's more than that. It's the totality of me. All my wrong turns. All my grief. All my rage. All my cruelty. He smiles, that cold, knowing smile, and says, "You brought yourself here. You were always coming. There is no haunting. No curse. Just the consequence of being seen. The mirrors tremble around us, each one showing me becoming him. 100 lives. 100 paths. All leading to this moment. What do you want from me? I whisper. He tilts his head. I want nothing. You've already given everything. I take a step back. I can't run. There's no space here. Just choices. And then I see it. Floating in the dark, a final mirror. Small. Unbroken. And empty. No reflection. Just a clean slate. An escape. Or a trap. The mirror-faced man watches, expression unreadable. Choose, he says. I walk toward the final mirror. Behind me, the reflections scream. They don't want me to leave. Because if I go, they stay. I lift my hand and reach toward the glass. The void quivers. The mirrors crack. And just before my fingers touch the surface, I whisper a name I had forgotten. My own. The glass ripples. A sound, like air being sucked from a room, and then light. He drives well, even when he doesn't know where he's going. The message stares back at me from the screen, just that one line, polite, casual, almost playful. But beneath the words, something festers. My eyes stay fixed on it longer than I should, and the letters seem to shift subtly, like worms beneath the skin of language. I try to exit the app. It doesn't close. Instead, the screen begins to flicker again, once, twice, before stabilizing into something new. A map. Not of my city. Not of any city. A network of roads in impossible geometries. Streets that loop back into themselves. Highways that spiral like nautilus shells. Dead ends that bleed into dark forests. Every street named something wrong, something felt rather than spoken, Mourner's Hollow. Chapel's Ashes. Vane Street. Endless Coil. In the center, pulsing like a diseased heart. You are here. I throw the phone into the passenger seat, chest rising and falling in tight, short bursts. I tell myself it's a glitch, a prank, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But I know better now. This isn't over. It never was. I lean forward, rest my forehead against the steering wheel, and close my eyes. Silence. At last. But then, the seat behind me creaks. Just slightly. Soft pressure settles against the back of my chair, the way it might if someone leaned in close. A whisper brushes the shell of my ear, so faint I almost convince myself I imagined it. Next time, you'll drive farther. And when I open my eyes, my phone's screen is lit again. A new request. No pickup address this time. Only the destination. Room infinity. No pickup point. No name. No profile picture. Just a single, pulsing request. My thumb hovers over accept, trembling. I want to throw the phone out the window. I want to walk into the gas station and sit under the harsh lights until dawn comes and this nightmare slinks back into whatever hole it crawled from. But I don't. Because some part of me already knows. There is no dawn. Not anymore. I press accept. And everything changes. The station lights flicker violently, then go black. The car engine dies. My breath fogs in the air again. And outside, where moments ago the world had returned to normal, the sky is wrong. The stars are gone. Replaced by long, narrow slits of red light that watch. My headlights sputter back to life, but they don't illuminate the parking lot. They reveal a corridor. A corridor where the gas station used to be, impossible in scale, with stone walls lined and flickering, broken monitors. Each monitor plays a grainy video loop, me, in the driver's seat, but not this drive. Others. Past rides I don't remember. Streets I've never seen. Some with passengers. Some, without heads. I try to reverse. The car doesn't move. The corridor pulls me forward. I shift into drive. I'm no longer steering. The app opens itself. A new map appears. There's no route, just a path, a pulsing red line dragging me forward, deeper into this digital crypt. As I drive, the corridor begins to shift. The monitors on the walls start to display other drivers. Other cars. Other eyes. Each of them driving somewhere they never chose. And above each screen, etched in something that might be rust, might be blood. Your ride has been selected. A voice begins to hum in the speakers, not music, not language. Something older. Binary lullabies sung in forgotten dialects. And then I see it. Up ahead, the corridor ends. A station. But not a gas station. A terminal. Black marble. Endless queues. Shadows waiting in line, tall, thin, wrong in ways the eye can't describe. Their faces are all static. In the center stands a single sign. Drivers must remain seated. I don't stop. The car rolls silently into the terminal. And they all turn to look at me. No eyes. Just static. A voice comes through the phone, whispering from deep within the code. You are the vehicle now. And as the car slows, coming to a stop before a door marked infinity, the steering wheel vanishes beneath my hands. The windows black out. And the seatbelt tightens, slowly, deliberately, across my chest. I scream. No sound comes. Only a final notification. Next ride begins now. Searching for passenger. And in the darkness, I feel it. Someone is climbing in behind me. At first, I told myself the whispers were just wind slipping through the ancient woodwork. This cabin had stood for over 70 years. Drafts were expected. Sounds carried. Nothing more. But the fire had died down to soft embers. The wind outside had calmed. And still, the voices whispered. Not loud, not clear, but persistent. Hushed syllables that scraped just beneath understanding, like language filtered through layers of cloth. Male and female voices blurred together, not speaking to me, but around me. I sat completely still. Even my breath was shallow. The two shadows on the far wall had grown darker. Denser, somehow. One was still mine, I hoped, though it no longer mimicked me precisely. The other, the tall, angular one, was moving subtly, gesturing with arms that bent at unnatural angles. Its head twitched occasionally, too fast, as though glitching between frames of a film. The whispers grew louder as the shadow's hands began to move in more intricate patterns, as though it was weaving something. A net. A script. A trap. My shadow leaned in closer. That's when I understood, it wasn't my shadow anymore. I stood. But the silhouette remained seated. I raised my hand, it did not follow. And then, as if becoming aware that I was aware, the false shadow turned its head slowly toward me. Not just on the wall, but as if seeing me through the wall. A cold dread spread through my limbs, settling in my chest like wet ash. I moved backward toward the door, every instinct screaming for escape. And yet, I could not leave. The cabin had changed. The windows no longer showed moonlight or trees. Just black. Like the world outside had been folded shut. The fire flared suddenly, bathing the room in golden light, and in that moment, the shadows vanished from the wall. They had stepped off it. I turned around. And saw nothing. But I felt it. A presence. No breath. No heat. Just pressure, like a hand resting against the inside of my skull. I ran to the bathroom and flicked the light on. The mirror showed only the room behind me. No reflection. I wasn't there. Not in the glass. But behind me, in the mirror, something moved. Something tall. Angular. Stretching thin fingers across the frame as though testing the boundary between dimensions. I backed away, slipped on the rug, cracked my elbow against the sink. Pain flared white. When I looked up again, the mirror was normal. I was there. Alone. But now, my shadow was gone. Gone completely. Not on the floor. Not on the walls. I had lost it. The absence of my shadow was more terrifying than any figure in the dark. We take them for granted, these companions of light. Echoes of our form, tethered to our every movement. They belong to us, right? But now, mine was gone. And I knew, I hadn't lost it. It had left. I sat in the bathroom for hours, lights on full, refusing to move. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched, not from any single direction, but from all sides at once. As if the room itself had eyes. Eventually, the cabin grew cold. Too cold. The thermostat read 68 degrees, but my breath came in clouds. And then, the whispers returned, not from outside the walls this time, but from inside my head. As if someone were speaking from behind my eyes. Not words, exactly, impressions. Return. Sit. Watch. Witness. I didn't want to obey. But some compulsion took hold. Not fear. Not even resignation. Curiosity. I stepped back into the main room. The fire had burned itself down to glowing coals, casting a dim orange light that stretched long shadows across the wooden floorboards. All of them were still, except one. Mine. It was back. Standing directly in front of me, even though I hadn't moved. It stood perfectly still, arms at its sides, mimicking nothing. And then, it turned around. I don't know how to describe the impossible geometry of what I saw. It shouldn't have been able to turn. But it did, facing me. Not the way a shadow faces a wall, but the way a person faces another person. And within the darkness of its face, something shimmered. Eyes. Not bright. Not visible. But felt. I took a step back. So did it. I raised a hand, and it didn't follow. But when I lowered my hand, it raised its own. We were reversed. Mirrored. Opposing. Then, the whispers took shape. Clear this time. You saw us before you were ready. You were alone. That made you a door. You fed the fire. You cast the invitation. My heart was thundering so loudly I could barely think. Every word echoed through my bones, vibrating with a resonance too old for human ears. The shadow stepped closer. The walls around me began to tremble. Knots in the pine wood twisted, shifting like eyes opening slowly after centuries of slumber. Your life had no weight. No tether. We are here to give it meaning. The fire flared once more. For a moment, the cabin vanished. And I saw, not with eyes, but with understanding. A forest of shadows. Endless. Stretching into some infinite night. Every tree a story. Every shadow, someone who had let go. The drunk. The isolated. The grieving. The abandoned. Each one invited. Each one claimed. Each one reversed. I screamed, not out loud, but within, and ran. Back to the bathroom. Back to the mirror. Still me. Still no shadow. I locked the door, though locks felt meaningless now. As I backed away, my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. Then it raised its hand and waved. Behind it, I saw a shadow. Not mine. Something taller. watching from the mirror glass fob. And then the reflection mouthed 2 words, in perfect sync with the whispers inside my skull. Let go. I staggered back from the mirror, heart clawing at my chest like it wanted out. My reflection no longer moved with me. It watched. Calm. Patient. Shadowed. And behind it, that thing, tall, thin, angular, loomed closer with every blink. Not walking. Just advancing. Each flicker of my eyelids brought it nearer, as though it only existed in the space between moments. I didn't understand the rules anymore. And I realized, I might never have. This wasn't a haunting. It was an exchange. Somewhere between my 3rd drink and the moment I noticed the shadow turn its head, I had passed a line. Signed something unseen. Let something in. And now I was living on borrowed presence. I unlocked the bathroom door. The cabin was silent. The fire had died. Every surface shimmered subtly with a layer of frost. My breath misted, my skin prickled. And across the room, standing before the cold hearth, was my shadow. But it was no longer a silhouette. It was solid. It had weight. Depth. Texture like matte smoke. And it was wearing my face. Not perfectly, more like someone trying to remember me from a dream. Slightly off. Slightly too still. It tilted its head. I mirrored the motion. It did not respond. And I understood, the thing I was looking at wasn't just pretending to be me. It was me. The part of me I left behind when I gave up. The version of myself that never crawled out of bed. That never answered the phone. That poured the 3rd drink and kept going. The version that lingered in silence long enough for something else to whisper back. It raised a hand. In its palm was a sliver of shadow. Sharp. Like glass. An offering. My mind screamed at me not to take it. But my soul, whatever of it remained, recognized the shape. It was the contract. The signature made in grief, sealed in isolation. And if I accepted it, I'd be whole again. But not the same. Never the same. I stepped forward. The shadow me smiled. And I felt it again, the hum. That low vibration beneath the floorboards. The pulse of something old beneath this cabin. This place wasn't just isolated. It was built for this. A shrine. A trap. A gate. I reached out. My fingers touched the sliver. It was cold. And yet it moved, squirming like ink frozen in glass. And then it sank into my palm. No pain. Just, wait. My shadow returned, slowly, crawling up the walls, the floor, wrapping around me like a coat. I felt whole. And I felt watched. From inside. From beneath. From mirrors yet unbroken. And the whisper returned, soft as breath in my ear. You are one of us now. You may return to the world, but you will never fully leave. I drove away from the cabin the next morning, the mountains bathed in golden light, as if nothing had happened. But I didn't go home. I didn't go anywhere. I just drove. And now, every building casts 2 shadows. Every person I see, I wonder if they've made the same exchange. If they've met themselves in the firelight. If they said yes. And when I pass a mirror, I don't look. Because I already know. It's watching back. Story 4, The Mirror That Remembers. It started with a quiet ad. No flashy promotions. No modern fonts. Just a folded flyer tucked between the pages of a book I picked up at a second-hand shop downtown. Whitmore Antiques and Oddities. Restoration of the rare. Rental of the reverent. Some mirrors show more than the surface. I was decorating my new apartment, a small, creaking space above a bookstore, filled with warm light, old floorboards, and too many memories of a life I was trying to leave behind. I wasn't looking for much. Just a statement piece. Something elegant. Something old. Something that wouldn't remind me of her. Whitmore's sat at the end of a narrow alley off Layton Street, a place I'd never noticed before. The bell above the door jingled softly when I stepped inside, and the air smelled of lavender and varnish. The shopkeeper was an older man with milky blue eyes and hands that never stopped polishing the countertop. He didn't look up when he spoke. "It found you, then?" I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but he simply turned and led me to the back of the store, through a velvet curtain that swayed despite there being no breeze. There, standing alone against a brick wall, was the mirror. 7 feet tall. Frame of weathered gold leaf and wrought iron. Roses entwined with serpents. And its surface, so smooth, so impossibly clear, shimmered like still water under moonlight. I stepped in front of it. And everything changed. The shop vanished behind me. The velvet curtain, the old man, the quiet, gone. All that remained was the mirror. And me. Except, the me staring back wasn't just a reflection. He smiled first. And I hadn't smiled in months. The old man's voice returned, echoing as if from inside the glass. "It remembers faces. It keeps them safe. Some come back different. I should have left. I should have run. Instead, I rented the mirror for 30 days. He charged me only $1. The first few nights, nothing happened. It stood in my hallway, elegant and still, catching candlelight and moonlight like a dream. But around the 5th night, I noticed a change. At dusk, the reflection lingered, just for a second, after I stepped away. A pause. A delay. And then, one night, I saw someone else in the background. A woman. Standing just behind my shoulder. Wearing a dress I remembered from years ago. Her face, impossible. Familiar. Her. Gone 2 winters ago. Buried beneath frost and silence. I turned. No one there. When I looked back, the mirror was empty again. But I couldn't move. Because for just a moment, when our eyes met in the reflection, she blinked. And I didn't. From that night on, everything changed. I couldn't walk past the mirror without looking. I tried. God knows I tried. But something in me needed to see her again. Not for closure. Not for comfort. Just to know that I hadn't imagined it. And the mirror, it knew. It began to show her more clearly. Each night, a little closer. Sometimes standing in the hallway behind me, just out of reach. Sometimes seated at the kitchen table with her hands folded gently, just as she had in life when she was waiting to speak. Sometimes lying in the bed I hadn't touched since she was gone, her hair fanned out over the pillow like the last breath of a dream. But only in the reflection. I'd turn, and find nothing. Always nothing. But my heart didn't believe the silence anymore. Grief makes fools of us. It teaches us to chase shadows. And the mirror? It was a master teacher. By the 10th night, I stopped sleeping altogether. I moved the mirror into the bedroom. I told myself I needed to watch it. To study. To understand. But I knew the truth, I wanted to be near her. I began talking to it. To her. Just a whisper here and there. Her name. A memory. A question I had never gotten to ask. And the mirror answered. Not with voice. But with gesture. She would raise a hand. Smile. Once, she even wrote something in fog across the mirror's surface, though when I looked again, it had vanished. Still, I knew what I'd seen. Stay with me. The old man from the shop never answered my calls. I went back once, the alley was gone. Just a blank wall. Not bricked up. Just, never there. Then came the 21st night. I remember it perfectly. Because that was the night the mirror stopped showing only her. It showed others. Dozens of them. Crowded behind her. Their eyes black. Their mouths open in silent screams. Their hands pressed to the glass, as if begging, or warning. And she just stood there, smiling. Her eyes no longer kind. Her expression unreadable. And I heard it. Not with my ears. But with the back of my skull. You called. We answered. That was the night the mirror no longer needed the reflection. That was the night she stepped out. Just one step. Just a toe. But the silvered surface rippled like water disturbed, and her foot touched the floor of my bedroom. Solid. Real. I ran. I've been living out of my car for days now. The mirror is still in the apartment. I know it is. But I can feel it everywhere. In the windows. In puddles. In my rear view. Watching. Waiting. She's out now. And the others? They're waiting their turn. The motel room reeks of stale coffee and mildew, but it's the only place left where no reflective surface remains. I've covered every scrap of glass and metal with torn bed sheets. Even my phone screen stays face down, always. Still, I feel it. A pull, gentle as breath on the nape of the neck. The mirror calling. Not from one place, from everywhere. I didn't find the mirror. It found me. And now, I understand. It remembers. Not just faces. Feelings. Loss. Grief. Longing. It feeds on them, waits until you're weak enough, hollow enough, and then it offers exactly what you miss most. Not as a gift. But as a bargain. Because the mirror was never just an object. Not an antique. Not a portal. Not even a curse. It's a record. A library of echoes. An ark for souls who were remembered too hard, held too tightly in grief, until the pull of memory outweighed the silence of death. And the more we stare, the more we feed it. I did some digging. Old archives. Scattered folklore. A hand-copied journal from a 19th century mortician. It's been called many names. The mourner's pain. The widow's looking glass. The veil between. And in the oldest account, carved into a wooden reliquary buried beneath a collapsed chapel in France. Le Miroir de l'Étreinte. The mirror of embrace. A place where spirits wait behind the silver, longing to return. But not all of them are who they once were. Because memory twists. And love, when desperate enough, distorts. I return to the apartment. Not because I'm brave. Because I can't live like this, hunted by glass, haunted by a smile that isn't hers anymore. The mirror is still there. Of course it is. Standing in the bedroom like an altar to sorrow. Covered in a white sheet. As I reach for it, my hand trembles. But I don't pull the sheet off. Not this time. Instead, I speak aloud, for the first time, not to her, but to them. The others. What do you want? And the answer comes. Dozens of voices, layered together, whispering in unison from behind the glass. To be remembered. To be returned. To be real. And what do I become? Silence. Then. The frame. I understand now. The mirror doesn't contain the dead. It contains us. Every time we stare too long, speak too fondly, ache too deeply for what is gone, we add a piece of ourselves to it. Until one day, we are what's remembered. We are what presses our hand to the other side of the glass. We are the whisper in someone else's ear. Stay with me. I walk away. For now. But even as I leave, I know it's not over. Because grief doesn't end. It evolves. It waits. And the mirror? The mirror is patient. It remembers everything. And each shadow wore a face I'd hidden from. There was Michael, my college roommate, his silhouette trembling as he whispered, "I called you." I begged. You let the line ring out. There was Clarissa, the colleague I'd left undefended, her voice hollow, "You said nothing while they destroyed me. And then you pretended you hadn't heard." Each one stepped from the wall as if peeling themselves from the very fabric of my memory, becoming solid not with mass, but with weight, emotional, existential, undeniable. They weren't ghosts. They weren't hallucinations. They were truth, given form. I sat before the fire, legs folded like a child awaiting punishment. The flames hissed low and steady, casting a steady light, but it no longer banished the dark. The shadows had no need of contrast anymore. They were part of me now. My father's figure knelt before me. Close enough that if I reached out, I might touch the ash black of his cheek. "You were always running," he said again, but this time not with judgment. There was grief there. Regret. Maybe even forgiveness. The fifth night blurred into the sixth. I didn't move. I barely slept. I let them speak. And I listened. It was the first time in years that I truly did. They told their stories, but through them, I heard mine. Every omission, every denial, every time I'd turned inward instead of towards someone else. Not sins, exactly. Just failures of presence. And now, I was being made present again, by force. I expected the seventh night to bring death, or madness. But what came instead was silence. No whispers. No shifting forms. No accusatory voices. Only firelight. Only breath. My own. The cabin felt hollow. Like the eye of a long storm had settled over it. And then I noticed, the shadows were gone. Not hiding. Not waiting. Gone. My heart beat faster. I stood, slowly, unsteady from so many nights of surrender. The window was still there, unbroken. I stepped to it, expecting the reflection of something behind me. There was nothing. The front door creaked open on its own. Morning light spilled in. And for the first time in what felt like years, I stepped into it. Epilogue. I'm back in the world now. But I am not the same. Something shifted in me, not just the acceptance of guilt, but the integration of it. I no longer run. Not from people. Not from pain. Not even from myself. The cabin still stands, as far as I know. I've told no one about what happened. Not really. But sometimes, I see it in others, that same tightening of the chest when an old story resurfaces. That same instinct to deflect, deny, forget. And when I see it, I tell them only this. The shadows don't want to hurt you. They just want to be seen. And I walk away, leaving the rest in the firelight. Story 5, The Postmark of Tomorrow. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address. No markings other than her name, written in perfect cursive, a script so clean it looked machine-made, yet somehow familiar. Eleanor Wren. 19, Pine Hollow Road. Ash Grove, Vermont. She turned it over in her hands 3 times before opening it. The paper felt old, not aged, but out of time, as though it belonged to a different century. Inside was a single photograph. A street corner downtown. Ordinary. Empty. Sunlight slanting across the sidewalk just so. Except for one detail. Standing near a lamppost, in the middle distance, was her son. Liam had been gone for 6 months. A crash. Rain-slick roads. The kind of late-night call no mother forgets. Closed casket. The coroner advised it. She didn't argue. She hadn't cried at the funeral. Not fully. She'd been waiting for something to feel real. And now, staring at this photo, grainy, sun-dappled, impossible, it did. Liam was wearing the red hoodie he'd bought at a thrift store 2 years ago. His hair was a little longer. But it was him. Definitely him. Her heart thundered in her chest. She turned the photo over. A date was written in the same perfect cursive. June 3rd. Today was June 1st. She didn't sleep. She stared at the photograph, traced the faint outline of Liam's face with trembling fingers, tried to convince herself it was a mistake. A look-alike. A cruel trick. But the next morning, another envelope waited on her doorstep. Same handwriting. Same weight. Inside, another photo. This one was closer. Liam again. Walking out of her favorite bakery downtown, holding a white paper bag, the kind they still used for their sourdough. A new date, June 4th. June 3rd arrived with brittle, anxious air. Eleanor waited on that same street corner for hours. And at 3:47 p.m., Liam walked past. Alive. Solid. Breathing. She gasped, called out his name. But he didn't look at her. Didn't stop. Just kept walking, as if pulled by an invisible thread. By the time she reached the corner, he was gone. The room seemed to breathe with the weight of their presence, the air thickening until it felt like it pressed against my skin, suffocating yet intimate, as if their sorrow and anger had become a tangible force. Each shadow that stepped forth was a fragment of my fractured past, a reflection of failures I had tried to bury beneath layers of denial and numbness. My college roommate's figure emerged next, his eyes hollow but searching, voice a fragile echo, "You left me to drown when I needed a hand." The accusation lingered in the silence that followed, sharp and unforgiving. Then Clarissa, the colleague I had silently condemned with my silence, materialized, her silhouette trembling yet resolute. "You chose comfort over truth," she whispered, the words cutting deeper than any blade. Their voices intertwined, a haunting symphony of guilt and regret that wrapped around me like chains forged from my own shortcomings. I could no longer distinguish where their voices ended and my own began. The faces blurred and morphed, each a mirror held up to a past I wished to forget. As the shadows multiplied, they no longer danced on the walls but moved through the room, swirling around me like a tempest of remorse. The flames from the hearth flickered wildly, casting grotesque shapes that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my ragged heartbeat. "You cannot run," the chorus intoned, voices melding into one, "for we are the truths you fled, the memories you denied." My breath caught in my throat. Tears spilled down, hot and unbidden, burning away years of suppressed sorrow. In that moment, the walls of the cabin felt less like prison and more like sanctuary, a place where all the broken pieces of my soul were laid bare. The tallest shadow, my father, stepped forward once more, his gaze softer now, carrying the weight of unspoken forgiveness. "You are not alone in this," he said, voice trembling with a tenderness I had never expected. "We were all lost, waiting for you to find us." I sank to my knees amid the swirling shadows, surrendering to the storm within. The whispers softened into lullabies of healing, the darkness around me transforming from torment to embrace. And in that fragile space between shadow and light, I began to remember, not just the pain, but the love intertwined with it. For to remember completely is to begin anew. The dust motes swirled lazily in the amber shafts of light, catching and refracting the fading glow like spectral dancers suspended in a timeless waltz. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories, as if the very walls of Henderson's Antiquities whispered the echoes of lives long past. The shopkeeper's hands trembled noticeably as he gently wrapped the vintage slide projector in fragile yellowed newspaper, his gaze furtively skimming past me, avoiding direct contact as though fearful of what might be revealed. There was an urgency to his movements, an unspoken warning carried in the slight quiver of his voice when he finally spoke. "I shouldn't be selling this," he murmured, voice brittle and haunted, eyes clouded like storm-worn glass. "It's not just a projector, it holds things better left unseen. But curiosity, an insatiable hunger to peer into the hidden and the forgotten, had drawn me inexorably to that very device. Its chrome body gleamed faintly, a stark contrast to the dust and neglect that coated the surrounding relics. The tactile precision of its dials and levers beckoned to me, a promise of mechanical grace, but also, perhaps, a gateway to something beyond ordinary perception. As I lifted the projector from its resting place, the old man's expression tightened, his eyes flickering with a mixture of regret and fear. "Be warned," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "this device shows more than images. It reveals the shadows cast by memory itself, and some shadows refuse to stay in the dark." The weight of his words settled on me like a shroud, yet I was already entranced. I carried the projector home, unaware that in the amber light of that room, amidst the spinning reels and flickering slides, I was about to awaken something that blurred the fragile boundaries between past and present, between what was remembered and what was forgotten. That evening, I set up the projector in the dim light of my living room, the amber glow of a single lamp flickering softly. The machine hummed to life with a comforting mechanical whir, the chrome gleaming as the reel began to turn. The first image flickered onto the aged white wall, a sunlit garden, flowers swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. The photograph was beautiful, serene, yet a subtle unease crept in as I studied the picture. As the slides progressed, the scenes grew stranger. A child's birthday party frozen in time, yet the faces blurred, as if smeared by an unseen hand. A man's smile fractured into jagged shards of shadow. A woman's gaze that lingered too long, piercing right through the room and into my soul. Then the images began to shift, not merely photographs, but moving moments. Silent and grainy, they played out like whispers of the past, memories replaying in secret corners of time. I reached out instinctively as if to touch one, my fingers passing through the flickering light, yet the sensation of cold dread settled into my skin. And then I noticed it. The figures in the slides were watching me back. Eyes following, expressions flickering with recognition, as if aware of my presence beyond the projector's beam. One slide lingered longer than the rest, a cracked window with a shadowy figure standing just beyond the glass. A figure that looked disturbingly like me. My heart pounded. Had the projector captured my memory? Or was it showing me something I was meant to see? A sudden chill swept the room. The projector's hum deepened, warping into a low, sibilant whisper that seemed to echo the voices trapped within the slides themselves. I realized then that this was no ordinary machine. It was a vessel, one that held fragments of lives, emotions, and secrets. And it was hungry. Hungry to be seen. To be remembered. To be freed. Each night, I found myself drawn back to the projector. The images became less predictable, less static. They flickered faster, shifting from faded photographs to fleeting scenes, alive with soundless movement. Faces emerged, twisted with emotion, joy, sorrow, anger, sometimes mine, sometimes strangers. Each slide felt like a confession, a fragment of a life suspended between time and memory. One night, as the reel turned, the room grew colder. The amber light dimmed, and the whispers swelled in volume, layering atop one another until the projector's hum became a cacophony of voices. I felt them press against my mind, fragments of stories begging to be told, secrets desperate to escape the confines of film. Suddenly, the image on the wall blurred and reformed into a room strikingly like my own, down to the faded wallpaper and the scattering of books on the floor. And there, in the corner, stood a figure, a woman in a vintage dress, her eyes hollow but piercing. I blinked. The figure raised a hand and pointed directly at me through the flickering light. My breath caught. A new slide advanced, but this one showed a different scene, my own reflection, distorted and fractured, staring back at me with a sinister grin. I recoiled, knocking over the projector. The machine clattered, but the reel kept spinning on its own. The images splintered and multiplied, filling the room with shadows that crept and curled along the walls. The projector's light seemed no longer a beacon, but a portal, opening cracks in the fabric of my reality. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the stories trapped within were not merely memories, but echoes of lives entwined with mine. Lives that wanted to be remembered. Lives that might never let me go. The whispers from the projector grew louder, no longer confined to the shadows on the wall but weaving into the very air around me. The faces in the flickering images morphed and shifted, some familiar, others disturbingly alien, their eyes beckoning me into the depths of forgotten stories. My reflection fractured within the glass, a sinister grin twisting its lips, mocking the fragile barrier between reality and nightmare. As the reel spun on, the room began to dissolve around me, the edges blurring and fading like an old film reel unraveling. I found myself standing at the threshold of a spectral corridor lined with countless mirrors, each one reflecting a fragment of a life, a secret, a sorrow longing to be unveiled. The projector was no longer just a machine, it was a gateway, a vessel carrying the weight of countless memories and the restless souls tied to them. Each mirror whispered my name, drawing me deeper into the labyrinth of remembrance and loss. The weight of their stories pressed upon me, threatening to consume my very essence. Yet, amidst the overwhelming tide, a fragile thread of resolve anchored me. I knew that to survive this haunting, I must face the shadows within and beyond the glass. The price tag read $45, astonishingly low for such a finely crafted piece. The shopkeeper muttered something about the previous owner's estate sale as he handed me the carefully wrapped bundle, but his words dissolved into the shop's heavy silence. My palms grew damp against the newspaper as I carried the projector to my car, though I blamed the humid September air rather than an unshakable premonition. Back in my apartment, I cleared space on the coffee table and unwrapped the projector with the reverence of an archaeologist unveiling a tomb. The chrome surface was cool beneath my fingers, pristine except for a small engraving on the base, property of Amos Blackwood, 1967. Inside the machine was a carousel of slides, 24 frames left behind by the previous owner, forgotten or abandoned. My heartbeat quickened as I plugged the device into the wall. The fan hummed to life with a gentle whir, and the projection bulb cast a perfect rectangle of white light onto the opposite wall. I dimmed the lights and pressed the advance button. The first slide clicked into place with mechanical precision. What appeared defied immediate comprehension. The image showed my living room, but from an impossible angle, as if the camera had been placed inside the very walls, looking outward through plaster and paint. Every detail was exact, the worn leather armchair where I sat each evening, the stack of unread novels on the side table, even the stubborn coffee stain on the carpet that had always eluded removal. Yet something was wrong. The perspective was disorienting, causing my stomach to lurch and my vision to blur at the edges. More disturbing still was a shadow pressing against the window from outside, a figure indistinct but unmistakably focused on the interior. On me. Trembling, I advanced to the next slide. This time it was my bedroom, again captured from the impossible vantage point inside the walls. My bed was unmade as I had left it that morning, sheets twisted from restless sleep. But in the corner where the dresser's shadow should have been stood a figure, not solid, not fully there, but unnervingly present. Tall, unnaturally thin, it watched the bed with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The third slide showed my kitchen. The pattern was clear, each photograph depicted a room in my apartment from the impossible interior viewpoint. And in every frame, the shadows had crept closer, shifting from the periphery to the very center of each room, where I would be. My mouth went dry. These weren't photographs of my apartment as it was, they were images of my apartment as it would be, tomorrow, next week, or sometime near. The books were arranged differently, new stains marked the carpet, subtle, eerie changes whispered of an unfolding future. Why were the shadows there? What were they waiting for? Slide after slide flickered past, shadows deepening and thickening. In one image of my bathroom, a figure stood behind where I would be brushing my teeth. So close that I could almost feel its breath. Its fingers pressed against the mirror, yet there was no reflection. Then came the 14th slide. I gasped aloud. It showed me sleeping in my bed, photographed from above, as if the ceiling had vanished. And in that image, the shadow stood at the foot of my bed, its form sharper, darker. Watching. Waiting. I realized then with chilling clarity, the projector didn't just show me the future. It was capturing moments before they happened. Moments I had yet to live. And the shadows? They were there. Not just waiting. But coming. The weight of the silence after the projector's death was suffocating, yet the scratching persisted, sharp, insistent, a relentless rhythm tapping against the fragile boundary of my reality. My breath came in shallow puffs, each one freezing instantly in the frigid air, a stark reminder that something unnatural had invaded the space I once called safe. The whispered voices, unintelligible yet charged with purpose, swirled around me like a dark fog, pressing close enough to feel their cold breath on my skin. Footsteps echoed softly on the fire escape outside, deliberate and slow, each one a promise of approach, a slow unraveling of the last threads holding back the encroaching shadows. I backed away from the window, heart hammering in my chest, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I was rooted to the spot by a paralyzing blend of terror and disbelief. The impossibility of what was happening tore at my rational mind, threatening to shatter the fragile barrier between waking and nightmare. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, casting the room into a strobe-like chaos where shadows danced madly across the walls. In the shifting light, I glimpsed forms, tall, thin, impossibly dark, materializing just beyond the veil of perception. Their faceless heads tilted as if curious, their elongated fingers reaching out toward the apartment's threshold. I could feel the air thickening, charged with a terrible energy that seemed to pulse in sync with my racing heartbeat. The room grew colder still, a bone-deep chill that crept into my very marrow. Then, through the chaos, a whisper, clear and unmistakable, brushed my ear, low and haunting. "You saw us. You called us. Now we come." With a scream trapped in my throat, I stumbled back into the darkened living room, searching desperately for anything to fend off what was closing in. My fingers grazed the edge of a heavy book on the table, the only weapon in reach. The shadows converged, pressing closer, their forms blurring and multiplying until they filled every corner of the room, their presence a living suffocation. The whispers became a chorus of forgotten memories, regrets, and warnings, a litany of lives intertwined with mine, souls trapped in a liminal dance between this world and the next. And as the tallest shadow reached out toward me, fingers like ink spreading across glass, I understood, the projector had not merely shown me a future. It had torn open a door. And the shadows waiting beyond were no longer content to remain behind it. The shadows pressed closer, their forms melting into one another like ink spilled on water, swirling and twisting with a slow, malevolent grace. The air grew dense, heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten sorrow, making each breath a labor. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the whispers, yet I could still feel their presence, watching, waiting, hungry. I grabbed the heavy book from the table, its weight a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. With trembling hands, I swung at the nearest shadow. My fist passed through cold, intangible air, but the ripple of resistance was enough to halt its advance momentarily. A collective hiss rose from the mass, voices layered in pain and fury. Frantically, I scrambled to the projector's tangled cords, desperate to find a way to undo whatever breach had been opened. The console flickered weakly in the gloom, and with a surge of frantic hope, I yanked the plug free. Instantly, the humming ceased, and the room was plunged into silence, thick and profound. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners and fissures of the walls like water seeping back into cracks. The whispers faded to a distant murmur, and finally, an eerie calm settled over the apartment. But the relief was short-lived. From the silence came a slow, deliberate tapping, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. It came from the window. I turned slowly. The glass was streaked with countless finger marks, those elongated impressions pressed from the other side, each one glowing faintly with an unnatural light. And beyond the glass, in the dense night fog, I saw them. Not mere shadows, but shapes, figures standing just out of focus. Watching. Waiting. Their eyes, if they had eyes, glowed with a cold, spectral light that pierced the darkness and locked onto mine. The tapping grew urgent, a Morse-like rhythm demanding entry. I backed away, heart pounding, knowing the doorway was still open, and the boundary between my world and theirs dangerously thin. And as the first tentative hand pressed against the glass, I realized, the night was far from over. The tapping at the window intensified, sharp and urgent, a relentless Morse code that echoed in the hollow chamber of my chest. I gripped the windowsill, knuckles white, the cold seeping into my bones as my eyes locked with the faint, flickering forms beyond the glass. The shadows, no longer mere silhouettes, had begun to press against the fragile barrier, their spectral fingers tracing patterns that seemed to pulse with dark energy, as though the window itself was a membrane stretched thin between two worlds. Desperation surged through me. I knew I couldn't let them cross. Whatever they were, lost souls, fragments of memory, or something far darker, their intrusion promised nothing but despair. Frantically, I searched the apartment for anything to reinforce the barrier. My hands closed around a box of salt on the kitchen counter, a folk remedy, perhaps, but a symbol of protection against shadows and spirits. I scattered a coarse line of it across every threshold and window frame, praying the old legends held true. But the scratching did not cease. If anything, it grew more frantic, the shadowy figures pressing harder, their forms flickering like a disturbed flame. I grabbed a large mirror from the hallway, the silvered glass cold and ominous in my hands. Turning it toward the window, I hoped to reflect their gaze back upon them, to confuse or repel them as ancient tales promised. The moment the mirror faced the glass, the apartment shuddered. The shadows recoiled, their faces contorted in silent screams that echoed in my mind. The window fogged instantly, as if breath had been expelled from some otherworldly lung. But the victory was fleeting. The largest figure, the tallest, with elongated limbs and an abyss where its face should be, pressed a palm flat against the window. A burst of icy wind slammed through the room, extinguishing candles and rattling frames on the walls. The mirror trembled in my grip. With every ounce of will, I raised it higher, angling it so the reflected light hit the window like a blade. A piercing, spectral shriek filled the air as the shadows writhed and shrank. The window's surface rippled like disturbed water. And then, the scratching stopped. Silence engulfed the room. The shadows vanished. The chill lifted. For now. Panting, trembling, I lowered the mirror. The room felt empty. But I knew deep down, the breach was only sealed temporarily. The shadows waited patiently, always watching, always hungry. And I, now the guardian of a fragile barrier, was not yet free. The room breathed in the stillness, the oppressive weight of darkness momentarily lifted yet lingering like smoke after a fire. My hands trembled as I set the mirror down, its cold surface reflecting a fractured image of my weary face. Despite the retreat of the shadows, I knew this calm was but a fragile veil stretched over a tempest waiting to burst. In the days that followed, the apartment seemed to pulse with an uneasy energy. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken words and unseen eyes. Objects shifted subtly when I wasn't looking, a book out of place, a chair slightly turned, shadows pooling unnaturally in corners. Sleep eluded me, replaced by restless nights filled with whispered voices that brushed against my consciousness like tendrils of fog. Then, one evening, a knock came at the door. Hesitant, deliberate. Not like any visitor I'd expected. When I opened it, no one stood there, only a small envelope resting on the welcome mat. I picked it up, the paper cool and rough beneath my fingertips. Inside was a single photograph, an old, sepia-toned image of a weathered book bound in cracked leather. On its cover was etched a symbol I had seen before, the same serpents entwined with roses that framed the antique projector's slide carousel. A note accompanied it, written in spidery script, "The story is older than you know. Seek the keeper." My heart quickened. The darkness I had encountered was no accident, no random haunting. It was part of a larger tapestry, a web spun through time, memory, and forgotten paths. I had to find the keeper. The photograph and note burned in my pocket as I closed the door behind me. The symbol, the serpents entwined with roses, haunted my every thought. I felt pulled towards something ancient, something buried beneath the surface of everyday life. I had to find the keeper. Days passed in a restless blur as I scoured libraries, obscure bookstores, and online archives, piecing together fragments of folklore and forgotten histories. Each clue whispered of an entity or person known only as the keeper, a guardian, or perhaps a warden, of memories and shadows. Stories hinted that the keeper maintained the balance between the worlds of the living and the dead, between remembrance and oblivion. One faded manuscript described the keeper as a custodian of a vast archive, a library not of books, but of souls and their stories, woven into artifacts and relics like the projector that had become my curse. Late one evening, a name emerged repeatedly, Marcellus Blackwood, an enigmatic figure rumored to have lived in the same region decades ago. The same surname as the engraving on the projector. Could he be the keeper? Driven by this revelation, I traced records to an old estate on the outskirts of town, an ivy-choked mansion, shuttered and steeped in silence. The locals avoided it, speaking in hushed tones about disappearances and strange lights flickering in the dead of night. With nothing left to lose, I ventured there. The heavy iron gates groaned as I pushed them open, the overgrown path crunching beneath my feet. Inside, the mansion breathed with decay and secrets, shadows pooling in every corner like sentinels. In the vast library, dust motes danced in shafts of moonlight, settling on shelves overflowing with leather-bound tomes and curious artifacts. At the center stood a figure, an old man, eyes gleaming with knowing, a slight smile curving his lips. "You've come," he said softly, voice rich with the weight of ages. "I need to understand," I whispered. "The projector, the shadows, they're not random. What is happening to me?" He nodded slowly. "You have glimpsed the threads that bind memory and spirit. You hold a key, but with it comes great peril." Marcellus Blackwood, the keeper, was no mere guardian. He was the gatekeeper of a realm where memories live and breathe, where the past's shadows seek to claim the present. "Will you help me?" I asked, hope and fear tangled in my voice. He regarded me for a long moment before replying, "Help comes at a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" I swallowed hard, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across Marcellus Blackwood's lined face, his gaze steady and unyielding. I could feel the gravity of what he offered, knowledge that promised salvation, but demanded sacrifice. "I'm ready," I said, voice trembling but resolute. "Whatever it takes." A slow nod. "Very well." He led me to a hidden alcove behind the library, a door concealed beneath a tapestry, worn and faded. The air grew cooler as we descended a narrow staircase into darkness. The walls glistened with damp stone, and faint whispers echoed from unseen corners. At the bottom, a vast chamber unfolded, walls lined with shelves upon shelves, not of books, but of countless objects, mirrors, clocks, photographs, relics, each humming softly with memories trapped within. "This," Marcellus said, gesturing around us, "is the archive. The resting place of memories too potent to fade, and shadows too restless to remain silent." He reached for a slender, ancient tome bound in cracked leather, opening it to reveal cryptic symbols and faded handwriting. "To seal the breach you've opened, you must confront the memories that tether these shadows, relive them, understand them, and release them." The path ahead was clear but harrowing. I would need to face the darkest corners of my past, not as a fugitive running from ghosts, but as a seeker willing to embrace the full weight of my truth. Marcellus placed a hand on my shoulder, eyes glinting with a solemn fire. "Are you prepared to walk through the memories, and return changed?" I drew a steadying breath, feeling the pulse of the archive surround me. "Yes," I whispered. "Because if I don't, these shadows will consume everything I am." The soft thud against my door echoed in the suffocating silence of the room. My fingers fumbled blindly for the switch, skin slick with cold sweat as they slid across the textured wall. When the harsh fluorescent light flickered to life, the apartment revealed itself, unchanged, mundane, and deceptively safe. The windows were clear, free of any sinister fingerprints. The unnerving sounds had vanished as if swallowed by the night. Yet, beneath that calm, a cold certainty settled in my bones. I had glimpsed the future through the projector's merciless lens, and the future was patient, biding its time. I spent the long hours before dawn perched rigidly in my armchair, every light blazing, eyes locked on every shifting shadow, every subtle flicker. Exhaustion eventually claimed me, dragging me into a fitful, restless sleep. When morning finally broke, I awoke to an unsettling emptiness. The projector was gone, vanished without trace. No hum, no mechanical click, no ghostly images projected onto my walls. Only the faint indentation on the carpet where it had sat, a silent testament to its recent presence. More haunting still was the knowledge it had imparted. The shadows I had seen were not mere possibilities, but certainties already woven into the fabric of my reality. They had always been here, lurking just beyond the threshold of perception, waiting for the precise moment to cross fully into my world. The projector had merely pulled back the veil, showing me what was inevitable. Now, sitting again in the very chair where I'd watched the nightmare unfold, I feel their presence gathering beyond my windows. The air grows impossibly cold. The darkness outside thickens, alive with patient fingers tracing frantic scratches against the glass. They know I have seen them. They know I am aware. The waiting draws to its close. Far away, under a storm-darkened sky, the Grand View Hotel loomed, a decaying tooth of Victorian architecture swallowed by the creeping mountain mist. Its warped proportions defied reason, windows misaligned, corners bending like fractured bones, shadows twisting unnaturally against the wan light. I should have fled the moment my GPS died hours ago on the endless, serpentine mountain roads, leaving me stranded between nowhere and everywhere. Yet when the hotel's neon sign sputtered through the fog, I felt a hollow relief, the exhaustion of 12 relentless hours behind the wheel etching itself into my bones. The lobby reeked of mothballs mixed with something organic, sickly sweet, curling cold fingers of nausea in my gut. Behind the reception desk sat a woman whose age seemed a shifting enigma. Flickering lights alternated her image between middle-aged and ancient, skin stretched tight like brittle parchment. She handed me a brass key attached to a heavy wooden fob marked 237, her voice distant as if carried on echoes far removed from the desk. Dinner had ended hours before, she said, and the hotel slept, or so it seemed. The elevator groaned, clanking upwards, each floor number popping painfully in my ears. The hallway stretched endlessly, its burgundy carpet worn into indistinguishable stains, sconces casting restless shadows that moved against the grain of their light. Room 237 sat at the corridor's end, or had it. A moment's doubt flickered, recalling the same number on a door opposite. The key turned smoothly, and I stumbled inside a room both cavernous and claustrophobic. The bed dominated the space, its floral comforter faded to the sickly hue of dried blood. A single window stared out into impenetrable blackness, though I was only on the second floor. Sleep came in fractured shards, pierced by noises from the very walls, rhythmic tapping, faint footsteps in empty halls, and beneath it all, a low humming that gripped my skin with icy fingers. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I awoke to the creak of my door slowly opening. Heart pounding, I lay perfectly still, muscles taut as bowstrings. The air shifted, the pressure dropped slightly, and a musty scent of the endless corridor seeped in. No figure crossed the threshold. No presence entered. Only the darkness watching. The first rays of dawn struggled to pierce the thick mountain fog as I forced myself out of bed, every muscle aching from a night steeped in restless dread. The events of the early morning lingered like a stain, the memory of that slowly opening door etched deep in my mind. But the hotel's oppressive silence offered no answers, only a growing sense that the building itself was alive, watching, waiting. I wandered the labyrinthine hallways, each turn twisting unnaturally, the faded burgundy carpet swallowing my footsteps. Doors numbered again and again, sometimes repeating, sometimes vanishing altogether, mocked me with their inscrutable patterns. The The sconces flickered, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers along the peeling wallpaper. In the lobby, the air still bore that sickly sweet scent, the unsettling perfume of decay mixed with something else. My eyes caught a worn leather-bound guestbook on a dusty counter. The entries spanned decades, some names scrawled in trembling hands, others typed with sterile detachment. A pattern emerged, whispered accounts of guests who had vanished without a trace, stories of strange noises, inexplicable cold spots, and sudden, disorienting shifts in the hotel's layout. One entry, dated 50 years prior, mentioned a black corridor where time lost meaning and shadows walked like people. The hotel's owner, a man named Elias Thorne, had disappeared after a fire devastated part of the building in the 1960s. Rumor said the fire never fully consumed the hotel's core, that beneath the ruins lay secret passages and rooms unregistered on any floor plan. Determined to uncover the truth, I sought out the hotel's basement, a place the receptionist had avoided mentioning. Navigating a narrow stairwell coated in dust and cobwebs, I descended into a maze of crumbling stone corridors. The air grew colder, heavier. At the heart of the basement, I discovered a heavy iron door, its surface etched with the same serpentine rose motif I had seen on the projector from the antique shop. The door hummed with an uncanny energy, a pulse that resonated deep within my chest. Gathering every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open. Inside was a chamber lined with mirrors, dozens of them, their surfaces rippling as if alive. Reflections twisted and danced, showing not just the room but memories, possibilities, and shadows of those who had entered before me. A whisper filled the chamber. "Welcome to the Grand View, where time bends and memories never die." The hotel was not merely a building. It was a nexus. A place where past and present collided, and where the shadows that haunted me had found a home. The chamber's air was thick and cool, each breath I took misting faintly in the dim, flickering light. The mirrors stretched endlessly in every direction, their surfaces alive with shifting images, moments frozen, memories fragmented, faces both familiar and alien reflecting back at me from every angle. It was as if the hotel's very soul was trapped within these glass walls, endlessly replaying echoes of lives long past. As I stepped deeper into the chamber, the floor beneath me seemed to ripple like water, distorting my reflection until it fractured into countless shards, each showing a different version of myself, some weary, some terrified, some utterly lost. The whispers grew louder, layering into a dissonant chorus that tugged at the edges of my sanity. One mirror shimmered and cleared, revealing a scene beyond the chamber, a narrow hallway lined with doors that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. I realized these were the corridors of the Grand View itself, endless and shifting, each door a gateway to a memory or a fate. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Elias Thorne, the vanished owner, his eyes deep wells of sorrow and madness. His voice was a fragile rasp, carrying the weight of decades. "This place is a prison," he whispered. "A crossroads for lost souls trapped between time and memory. The hotel bends reality to hold them, to feed on their stories." He extended a trembling hand toward a mirror that glowed with a soft, beckoning light. "To escape, you must walk through the corridors of your own past. Face the shadows you carry, the doors you've locked tight. Only then can the cycle be broken." The chamber pulsed with energy as the mirrors rippled, revealing visions of pain, regret, and moments I had buried deep within myself. The path ahead was clear but treacherous. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the hotel's curse settle on my shoulders. With a determined step, I crossed the threshold into the shifting corridors, each door promising revelation, or oblivion. My footsteps echoed softly along the worn carpet, the endless hallway stretching before me like a living labyrinth. Doors flickered in and out of existence, their outlines shimmering with a ghostly light, each one a silent invitation and a warning. With every step, a mixture of dread and curiosity tightened around my chest. I reached out and touched the first door on my left. The cold would send a shiver up my arm as it swung open, revealing a scene both familiar and heartbreaking, my childhood self standing alone beneath a relentless downpour, eyes clouded with loneliness I had long buried. The soft patter of rain filled the space, mingling with distant laughter, echoes of happier days long forgotten. The weight of that forgotten sorrow pressed down on me, raw and unforgiving. Pushing forward, I opened the second door. Darkness swallowed me, cold and oppressive. Through the mist emerged the silhouette of a lost loved one, their eyes heavy with reproach and regret. Their whispered words cut through the silence, naming my failings, my broken promises, the spaces where I had abandoned them. Each door led me deeper into the maze of memory, forcing me to face fragments of myself I had tried desperately to hide, fragments shattered by pain, guilt, and denial. With every confrontation, I felt pieces of my spirit crack and then slowly begin to mend. I realized this was not merely an escape from the hotel's curse but a reckoning, a chance to accept the past, forgive myself, and reclaim the parts one had lost. The corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly, each door a threshold to a memory I had long buried beneath layers of time and pain. I hesitated before the final door, a heavy oak slab adorned with the same entwined serpents and roses I had seen etched throughout the hotel. My hand trembled as I reached out, the cold metal of the handle biting into my palm. As I pushed the door open, a flood of memories crashed over me, not just fragments, but whole moments, vivid and raw. I stood once again in the moments that had defined me, the losses I had refused to face, the words left unsaid, the wounds never healed. The shadows gathered around me, no longer hostile but expectant. They were the echoes of my own soul, waiting for reconciliation. With a deep breath, I stepped forward into the light. The oppressive weight that had clung to me lifted like a shroud, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free, though forever changed. The Grand View Hotel was no longer a prison, but a crucible, forged from my own fears and regrets, now tempered by acceptance and courage. As I exited the labyrinthine halls, the mist began to lift, the sun piercing through the storm clouds, casting the mountain in a golden glow. Outside, the world awaited, a world I was ready to face, shadows and all. The mountain air was crisp and biting as I stepped out of the hotel's twisted embrace. The fog that had clung to the Victorian facade like a suffocating shroud was now dissolving, the rising sun scattering shadows with its golden light. I breathed deeply, the chill in my lungs a sharp reminder that I was still very much alive. But something within me had shifted irrevocably. The weight of unseen burdens had lifted, replaced by a cautious clarity. The memories that had once haunted me no longer lurked in dark corners, they had been named, faced, and woven back into the tapestry of my being. As I descended the winding mountain road, the hotel faded into the distance, its impossible angles blurring like a half-remembered dream. Yet, the Grand View's story was far from over. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes, fleeting shadows at the edge of vision, whispers carried on the wind, and reflections in glass that lingered a moment too long. The hotel's reach extended beyond its walls, a reminder that some places, and some truths, never fully release their hold. And then, the letter arrived. No return address. No signature. Just a single line scrawled across the page. The Grand View awaits your return. The letter trembled in my hands, its stark message etching itself into my mind like a cold brand. The Grand View awaited my return. The words were simple, yet heavy with a promise, or perhaps a threat, that the past was not so easily left behind. Days turned into restless nights. No matter how far I roamed, the hotel's presence clawed at the edges of my consciousness. In reflections, in passing shadows, in the quiet moments between thoughts, I felt its gaze, patient, unyielding, insistent. One evening, as twilight bled into darkness, I found myself standing once more at the mountain's base. The path leading upward was cloaked in mist, yet the Grand View silhouette loomed unmistakably against the sky, a beckoning and terrible beacon. I hesitated, the weight of what I had endured anchoring me in place. But the pull was irresistible. Some part of me knew that the journey was far from over, that to truly be free, I would have to confront the hotel's deepest secrets. With a steadying breath, I stepped onto the winding trail, each step carrying me closer to the unknown. The door stood ajar, revealing a sliver of hallway unlike the one I'd navigated hours ago. This corridor was narrower, the carpet patterned with strange, twisting motifs, and the sconces emitted a harsh bluish light that stabbed painfully at my eyes. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold that clung to the air like a living thing. I forced myself upright, my joints protested with sharp, unnatural pops that echoed in a heavy silence. Peering out, the hallway stretched endlessly both ways, the door numbers jumbled without logic, 315, 408, 172, scattered like forgotten runes. The metallic tang of copper flooded my mouth, sharp and biting. Stepping barefoot onto the carpet, a chilling numbness seeped through my soles, a cold that seemed to suck warmth from my very bones. Behind me, the door swung shut with a soft click. Turning, I saw the brass numbers had shifted, from 237 to 891. My breath hitched, terror knotted in my gut. Hotels didn't rearrange themselves. My rational mind scrambled for explanations, stress, exhaustion, hallucination, but my body screamed a primal warning, I was in danger. The handle of room 891 was ice cold, locking my hand momentarily with a frost-like sting that left faint impressions on the brass. The next door, 624, was equally barred. The numbers shimmered and warped when I wasn't looking directly, never quite steady. At the corridor's end, a heavy fire door marked stairs offered slim hope. I pushed it open, but instead of stairs, another hallway unfurled, a twisting, endless gallery of slightly ajar doors. Peering through them, I glimpsed rooms defying the hotel's dimensions. One room was a hall of mirrors reflecting endlessly into black infinity. Another contained draped furniture swaying without breeze. In a third, a solitary figure sat on a bed's edge, still as stone, back turned. My voice cracked as I called out, but silence swallowed my words. As I eased the door wider, the hinges screamed, revealing the figure, an elderly man in striped pajamas. His hands rested rigidly on his knees, his head was cocked, listening to whispers inaudible to me. I reached to touch him, my fingers passed through like smoke, numbing as ice crawled up my arm. Then he snapped his head toward me with unnatural speed. His eyes rolled back, showing only white sclera, his mouth hung open in a perfect circle. He stared right through me, whispering in a language like wind rustling dead leaves. Fear shattered me. I ran. Back in the corridor, the doors had multiplied, hundreds now, stretching beyond sight. Each bore cryptic numbers and shifting symbols, geometric shapes that burned the eyes, characters writhing out of focus. Behind many, more figures stood or sat motionless, a woman brushing hair with mechanical grace, a man reading a newspaper frozen mid-turn, two people hunched over a chessboard, locked in eternal stalemate. All trapped between moments, held prisoner in this corridor of endless, haunting stillness. The endless corridor seemed to breathe around me, the air thickening with a silent tension that pressed into my lungs. Each door, a portal into frozen moments, fragments of lives caught between time and oblivion. I could feel their weight, the heavy stillness pressing against my very soul. As I moved cautiously forward, the flickering sconces cast jittering shadows that twisted into grotesque shapes, dancing on the peeling wallpaper like ancient phantoms. The temperature dropped further, my breath now a visible mist in the chilling air. The strange symbols on the doors pulsed faintly, as if alive, shifting subtly whenever I tried to focus on them. A sudden, sharp sound shattered the oppressive quiet, the click of a door closing somewhere behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the hallway stretched empty, silent as a tomb. The realization sank in cold and deep, I was not alone, but utterly isolated within this labyrinth. Summoning what courage remained, I reached for a door marked with a symbol resembling a coiled serpent entwined with a rose, the same motif that had haunted the hotel's shadows and my nightmares. My fingers trembled as I turned the handle, the cold metal biting into my skin. The door swung open to reveal a dimly lit room, walls lined with faded photographs and journals. The air smelled of dust and forgotten memories. In the center, a desk bore an open book, its pages filled with handwritten accounts of those trapped in this place, souls ensnared by the hotel's curse. As I read, a chilling truth emerged: the Grand View was no mere building. It was a sentient prison feeding on despair, a nexus where lost memories were captured and replayed endlessly, trapping all who entered in an unbreakable cycle. A sudden whisper grazed my ear, colder than the room itself: the key is to remember, but not to be remembered. I turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the shadows, watching, waiting. The whispered phrase lingered in the cold air, weaving itself into my thoughts like a dark incantation: the key is to remember, but not to be remembered. Its meaning eluded me, yet it pulsed with an undeniable truth that both terrified and compelled me. I closed the journal gently, feeling the weight of countless trapped souls pressing against my mind. Their stories, each a thread in a tangled web of the Grand View, spoke of memories twisted into prisons, of lives replayed endlessly with no hope of escape. I turned to leave the room, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. The walls seemed to close in, the once dim corridor now suffused with a suffocating darkness that swallowed the flickering sconces. A voice echoed, low, ancient, and resonant, seeping from the very stones beneath my feet. To leave, you must unmake the memory. To live, you must forget the prison. Panic surged as shadows began to coalesce, swirling around me with a weight that threatened to drag me into the depths of the hotel itself. I clenched my fists, summoning every shred of willpower to resist the pull. In that moment, a sliver of clarity pierced the darkness. To survive, I could not cling to the past. I had to release the hold memories had on me, not erase them, but accept their impermanence and let them fade like whispers on the wind. With trembling breath, I closed my eyes and focused on the fragments of pain, regret, and fear, the memories that had haunted me through the corridors of this cursed place. I acknowledged each one, then imagined them dissolving, drifting away on a breeze only I could feel. Slowly, the oppressive weight lifted. The shadows recoiled, the darkness softened, and the door before me creaked open. I stepped through, the air warming as the corridors reshaped themselves into a familiar path, a way out. As I emerged into the mountain dawn, the Grand View stood silent and still behind me, its mysteries locked away once more. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as I stepped away from the looming silhouette of the Grand View Hotel. The sun was rising, casting warm hues across the misty peaks, but inside me, a quiet storm churned. I was free, or so it seemed, but the memories, the faces, and the chilling whispers lingered like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Days passed, and the world outside moved on with its indifferent rhythm. Yet I found myself unsettled, haunted not by ghosts, but by a new awareness. The journey through the hotel's endless corridors had peeled back layers of denial and fear. I saw myself reflected not just in mirrors, but in the fractured stories of others trapped there, each struggle a mirror to my own. Old wounds reopened, but this time, instead of fleeing, I faced them with a cautious hope. I sought out the people I'd left behind, the ones I had abandoned in my solitude. Conversations that once felt impossible now unfolded, fragile but sincere. Forgiveness, both given and received, became a balm I hadn't known I needed. Yet, some nights, when the wind whispered just right, and shadows flickered beneath the streetlights, I felt the pull again, a reminder that some doors, once opened, never fully close. And somewhere deep in the mountains, the Grand View waits patiently, its corridors shifting, its shadows gathering, ready for the next traveler to lose themselves in its maze. Rain hammered relentlessly against the windshield as I navigated the serpentine mountain road, headlights barely piercing the fog that clung like a shroud. My phone had died hours ago, no signal, no map, just the cold weight of isolation pressing in from all sides. Then, through the gray haze, a flicker of neon, the Grand View Hotel's sign sputtering like a dying beacon. Exhaustion and despair warred within me, but the promise of shelter pulled me forward. As I crossed the threshold into the dimly lit lobby, the air shifted, heavy with mothballs and that sickly sweet scent, the same scent I'd heard whispered about by locals with a shudder. Behind the desk, the receptionist's eyes held centuries of sorrow, and her voice carried a distant echo. "Room 237, she said, handing me a brass key on a wooden fob, her gaze lingering a moment too long. The hallway stretched before me, endless, shifting, impossible. And I knew, with a hollow certainty, that this was no ordinary place. The Grand View had chosen me. My mouth was dry as dust, my hands trembling so violently I clenched them into tight fists to steady myself. Rational thought clung desperately, insisting this must be a dream, that soon I'd awaken in room 237 with only an unsettling memory to haunt me. But dreams did not smell of decay and ozone. Dreams did not make your skin crawl with the unmistakable certainty of dozens of unblinking eyes watching from the dark. I tried to retrace my steps, to find my way back to that original room, but the corridors had transformed into an impossible labyrinth. Every turn spun me deeper into madness, leading to hallways that warped and stretched beyond reason. Doors I thought familiar opened onto entirely new spaces, the carpet beneath my feet shifting colors, from deep crimson to sickly green, its patterns twisting and warping until my eyes watered with strain. The flickering lights overhead stuttered in a maddening strobe, making every movement jerk and distort like a fractured film reel. Hours passed, if time still had meaning in this place, but my watch had stopped at 3:17, frozen like everything else. Frozen figures appeared more frequently. A cleaning woman pushing a cart that never moved, a businessman endlessly checking his watch, a couple locked in an unfinished embrace. Each one was a phantom, intangible. My hands passed through them like smoke, yet I could feel their attention as a tangible pressure against my skin. Their blank, unblinking eyes followed me, aware but trapped. Patterns emerged in the chaos. Door numbers appeared repeatedly. The woman brushing her hair stood in multiple rooms, performing the exact same motion. The businessman appeared every seventh or eighth door, his arm raised the same way each time. The hotel recycled its horrors, rearranging the same fragments endlessly. I clung to the idea that if I could decode the pattern, I might find escape. Prime numbers appeared on doors leading to empty rooms. Multiples of 7 housed the frozen figures. Even numbers looped back on themselves. My room number, 237, was prime. Perhaps another prime number held the key to return. Legs aching and throat raw, I pressed on, every creak and whisper a threat in the suffocating air. Then I found it, door 239, just 2 numbers higher. The brass gleamed, pristine. The door stood ajar, swallowing the darkness behind it. I pushed it open cautiously, and stepped into a room identical to the one I'd left hours ago. Same faded floral comforter, same musty smell of neglect, same small window looking out into nothingness. My suitcase sat waiting on the luggage rack, clothes folded exactly as I'd arranged them, lamp positioned just so. But when I turned to close the door, I noticed the brass plate now read 239, not 237. The hotel had allowed me to return, but not to the same place. The truth struck me cold, my original room no longer existed in this shifting nightmare. The Grand View rearranged itself relentlessly, governed by rules I could barely grasp. I was trapped, not by locks or walls, but by the hotel's merciless refusal to stay constant. And I was lost within its endless, shifting corridors. The dawn finally arrived, though its light felt wrong, pale, thin, lacking the warmth that should have accompanied a sunrise. The filtered rays spilling through the window cast cold shadows, as if the very sun hesitated to touch this place. I packed my belongings with a strange heaviness in my chest and descended the grand staircase to the lobby. The scene was a mirror of the night before. The same faded carpet, the same worn reception desk, and the woman behind it, who might have been the same person or someone else entirely. Her smile was polite, pleasant, utterly unreadable. When I mentioned the strange labyrinthine horrors of the night, her face remained blank, as if I were speaking a foreign language. The Grand View is a perfectly ordinary hotel, she assured me, her voice smooth as polished stone. I hope you had a restful stay. I left without looking back, the chill of the hotel's secrets settling like a frost on my soul. Yet, a part of me never left that shifting maze. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, doors appear, marked with impossible numbers and symbols that defy logic. The distant hum, like a heartbeat beneath silence, whispers in the spaces between sounds. The grand view still stands on that mountain road, waiting, patient, eternal, for the next weary traveler to wander through its doors, becoming another frozen figure trapped in endless time, checking their watch, brushing their hair with mechanical precision, forever caught in the same moment. I never found room 237 again, but I know it's there, waiting for me to return and complete the cycle I disturbed by unraveling its pattern. Some nights, I dream of corridors stretching into infinity, waking with the metallic tang of copper on my tongue and the certainty that, somewhere, my suitcase still sits on a luggage rack, waiting to be unpacked. Story 6. The silence at Blackwater Lake was unnatural, thick and suffocating, pressing against my eardrums like water itself. The occasional lap of waves against the rocky shore was the only sound in a wilderness seemingly holding its breath. The trees leaned over the water with a strange intent, their reflections shifting independently of the branches above. I'd come seeking solitude, a 3-day camping trip to clear my head after signing the divorce papers. The real estate agent had mentioned the lake's remoteness, accessible only by a narrow dirt road winding 12 miles through dense pine forest. What she hadn't mentioned was how the water looked black even at noon, or how the wilderness seemed to silence every bird and creature. My tent sat 20 feet from the water's edge, positioned to catch the sunrise that never fully pierced the mist hovering over the lake. The first day passed uneventfully, though small oddities gnawed at me, the compass needle wavering near the water, my cell phone draining faster than it should, and the complete absence of wildlife sounds. By the second night, nerves frayed thin, sleep fragmented by unidentifiable noises, soft splashes out of rhythm with the lake's gentle waves, a low humming vibrating beneath my sleeping bag. Each time I unzipped the tent flap to investigate, only darkness and oppressive silence greeted me. Then, on the third night, everything changed. I lay awake for hours, staring at the tent ceiling, debating whether to abandon the trip at first light. My watch read 2:47 a.m. when the first light appeared beneath the water, faint, pulsing gently like a visible heartbeat some 30 feet from shore. Blinking hard, the glow remained. More lights joined, rising slowly from the depths, scattered points of luminescence dancing with uncanny purpose. The pulsing lights beneath Blackwater Lake's dark surface seemed to breathe in time with my own racing heart. Each soft glow expanded and contracted, as if the lake itself were alive, watching, waiting, awakening. I swallowed hard, the cold air tightening around my throat, and forced myself to rise from the tent. The mist hugged the shoreline like a ghostly veil as I stepped toward the water's edge, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The luminescent orbs drifted closer together, coalescing into shapes too indistinct to name, yet unmistakably deliberate. They pulsed in rhythm, a silent beckoning that sent a shiver down my spine. The low humming that had vibrated through the ground grew louder, resonating in my bones as if the lake's depths were calling to something ancient and terrible. A sudden ripple disturbed the water. From the black depths emerged a figure, tall and slender, its form shimmering with the same eerie light as the orbs. Its eyes, twin lanterns of cold fire, locked onto mine. Frozen, I watched as more shapes surfaced, emerging like drowned spirits summoned from forgotten graves. Their bodies flickered between solid and vaporous, gliding silently across the water's surface toward the shore. I stumbled back, heart pounding, but a strange calm settled over me, as if the lake's dark secrets whispered promises I both feared and longed to understand. The spectral figures glided closer, their forms shimmering like liquid moonlight disturbed by a restless tide. Each movement was slow, deliberate, and eerily silent, as if the lake itself breathed through them. Their eyes, cold, unblinking orbs of pale fire, held an ancient sorrow that pierced through me, unraveling the fragile threads of my resolve. I could feel the ground beneath my feet pulse with a rhythm that matched the low humming now swelling into a haunting melody, an otherworldly lullaby that stirred memories I never knew I had. The air grew thick, saturated with a weighty presence that pressed against my chest, making each breath a struggle. One of the figures extended a hand towards me, translucent fingers reaching like tendrils of mist. Despite every instinct screaming to flee, I found myself rooted, mesmerized by the bittersweet melancholy radiating from these emissaries of the lake. The water around them churned softly, and faint images flickered beneath the surface, visions of forgotten tragedies, lost hopes, and whispered promises submerged in time's dark embrace. I sensed they were not mere phantoms but keepers of stories, souls bound by sorrow and waiting for release. A voice echoed in my mind, barely more than a breath, "Remember us, and we shall set you free." The boundary between past and present blurred as the lake's secrets unfolded before me. To understand, I knew I must dive beneath the surface, confronting the darkness below and the memories it guarded. The water around me shimmered with an eerie phosphorescence, glowing softly as if something vast and ancient stirred beneath the black depths. My fingers trembled as I unzipped the tent flap, the cool night air biting at my skin. The lights beneath the surface had grown brighter, inching ever closer, pulsing like ghostly fireflies in the abyss. My breath hitched in shallow gasps as I crawled from the shelter and stood at the lake's edge. Despite the chill that wrapped itself around me like a shroud, my feet were rooted to the muddy shore, held fast by some unseen force. Then came the touch, gentle, like a lover's caress, yet cold as the deepest winter. It grazed my left hand, sending a shock through my body. I jerked back, heart pounding, but the air held no visible shape. A thick presence pressed against my skin, tangible and suffocating. A whisper slithered into my mind, not through ears, but deep within my thoughts. It was ancient, layered with patience that spanned centuries, speaking of secrets hidden beneath the lake, knowledge waiting for one worthy enough to claim it. My mouth felt parched, sweat beading on my forehead despite the freezing air. My legs trembled under the weight of the unseen summons. The voice promised revelation, a key to mysteries humanity had chased since the dawn of time. All I needed to do was follow the lights deeper, to where their glow burned strongest. I took a tentative step toward the water. Rationality screamed a desperate warning, but the hypnotic pull of those underwater stars drowned it out. The lake's dark surface shimmered invitingly, promising cool embrace and hidden truths. Closer now, the tiny waves lapped at my boots, the phosphorescent trail leading straight into the abyss below. My vision blurred at the edges, I realized I'd been holding my breath. Then, something shifted in my peripheral vision, the tree reflections on the lake twisted and writhed unnaturally, revealing not the world above, but something else entirely. Something waiting. The cold touch returned, gripping my wrist with sudden strength. Fingers, unseen but real, pulled me toward the water's surface with gentle insistence. My heart hammered wildly as sweat streamed down my face. And then I saw them, faces beneath the surface, pale, distorted, eyes reflecting the strange lights like eerie mirrors. Their mouths moved silently, whispering unspoken treaties. Some faces were human, others grotesquely inhuman. All reached upward, desperate, grasping. The whisper swelled into a chorus, voices blending in hypnotic unison. They promised wonders beyond imagining, secrets to transform me into something more than human, if only I would step into the water and let it claim me. My foot moved forward, drawn in by their siren song, until I caught sight of a face that shattered the spell, my own, reflected beneath the water. But this was no mere reflection, it was me, already submerged, already one of them. My eyes burned with the same desperate hunger. My underwater self mouthed words I couldn't hear but understood deeply, "Help me." Adrenaline surged like ice through my veins. I wrenched my wrist free, stumbling backward, gasping as though dragged from the depths myself. The lights below flared angrily, the water churning violently, but I was already fleeing. Branches clawed at my clothes, roots threatened to trip me, but I crashed through the darkness, away from the lake's malevolent glow and the haunting faces beneath its surface. Heart pounding like a drum in my chest, I tore through the thick underbrush, branches lashing at my face and tearing at my clothes. The cold night air burned my lungs, but I didn't dare slow down, not with those spectral eyes burning in my mind, pleading for help. The whispers echoed faintly behind me, carried on the wind like a haunting lament. I stumbled onto the dirt road, the familiar gravel crunching underfoot, and didn't look back. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and Blackwater Lake's dark depths. But deep inside, I knew I hadn't escaped. Not really. Sleep eluded me for nights afterward. Dreams haunted by phosphorescent lights and pale faces rising from black water, calling silently for release. Each morning I awoke drenched in sweat, the taste of copper still lingering on my tongue. Driven by a need to understand, I returned to the nearby town, seeking answers in local legends and whispered warnings. The elders spoke of the lake as a place where time stalled, where the boundary between the living and the dead thinned to a fragile membrane. They told stories of travelers who vanished without a trace, swallowed by the lake's insatiable hunger. Some claimed the lights were spirits of the lost, bound to the lake until someone would remember them and break the cycle. Others whispered of an ancient entity slumbering beneath the black waters, an eternal watcher, waiting for the next soul to draw near. I realized then that my encounter was no accident. The lake had chosen me, marked me. Whether as a warning or a summons, I could not say. But one truth was clear: to find peace, I would have to confront whatever lay beneath Blackwater's surface. I stepped into the Blackwood Public Library, the creaking door closing behind me with a finality that sent a chill through my spine. The air was thick with decay, each breath a struggle, as if the building itself had been holding its breath for decades. The dust clung to every surface, coating the bookshelves, the desks, and the rows of forgotten tomes that lined the walls. The library's Gothic Revival architecture seemed more like a haunted relic than a place of knowledge. The walls, twisted and worn by neglect, loomed around me like silent sentinels, guarding secrets that had long been buried. The flickering yellow light from the overhead bulbs cast an eerie glow, adding to the sense of being trapped in a place out of time. The air felt heavy with forgotten stories, pressing against my mind, begging to be uncovered. I shouldn't have been here. The signs outside, warnings about structural instability, asbestos contamination, were more than enough to keep anyone away. But my research had led me here. I'd exhausted all other leads in town, and despite the strange rumors about disappearances that had plagued the area in the 1800s, no one seemed willing to discuss the past. Not the historical society, not the current librarian, not even the locals who spoke in hushed tones when the subject of the library came up. The vagrant's directions had been clear: the side door had been broken for years. One small bribe and a promise to keep quiet was enough to gain entry. His words still echoed in my head as I stood in the center of the library, unsure of what to do next. The musty scent of mildew and rotting paper made my stomach churn, but it was the other smell, something darker, more organic, that unsettled me the most. I couldn't place it, but I knew instinctively that it wasn't a natural smell. It was the kind of odor that suggested something had been growing here for far longer than it should have. Something unnatural. I pushed forward, feeling the oppressive atmosphere closing in around me. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, by something old, something hidden. The deeper I ventured into the darkened aisles of books, the more disorienting the silence became. It felt like the building was alive, breathing with me, its walls pulsating with secrets. Finally, my eyes caught on a small, inconspicuous door at the far end of the room, tucked behind a large stack of forgotten archives. The door was cracked open just slightly, almost as if it were waiting for someone to find it. I approached cautiously, every nerve on edge. My hand reached for the handle, and the cold metal sent a shock of ice through me. The door creaked open with a sound so unnatural it made my skin crawl. Inside was a room that seemed to have been untouched for years, dusty shelves filled with old books, but these weren't the same books I'd seen in the main library. These were older, their leather covers cracked, their pages yellowed with age. Some were locked away in glass cabinets, their bindings and titles unfamiliar. My pulse quickened as I noticed a large, worn book resting on a pedestal at the center of the room. The book was open, and the pages, though yellowed, were legible. The text was written in a language I didn't recognize, the script twisted and flowing like a river of ink, but something about it felt ancient. Dangerous. A sudden thought flashed through my mind: my grandmother's stories. The ones she told me as a child. She had always spoken of shadows that walked among the living, of beings that lived between the pages of forgotten books, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in the veil between worlds. And here I was, standing in a room filled with those very shadows, staring down at the very book that might be the key to all those stories. The whispers started softly, so faint I wasn't sure if they were real or just a figment of my imagination. But as I leaned closer to the book, the whispers grew louder, clearer. It was as if the shadows themselves were calling to me, urging me to read, to open the next chapter. I resisted at first, but the pull was undeniable. My fingers brushed the edges of the book, tracing the strange symbols on the cover. The moment I touched it, the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, and I felt something stir beneath the floorboards, a presence that had been sleeping for centuries, now waking. The moment my fingers brushed the ancient book's cracked leather cover, a shudder rippled through the room, as if the very walls exhaled after holding their breath for centuries. The whispers swelled, no longer distant murmurs but urgent voices threading through the stale air, echoing in my mind with impossible clarity. The text on the pages twisted and writhed before my eyes, shifting between symbols I couldn't comprehend and fleeting glimpses of haunting images, shadowy figures lurking at the edges of candlelight, faces contorted in silent screams, ink-dark pools reflecting impossible worlds. A cold draft swept through the chamber, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decayed parchment. The glass cabinets lining the walls began to tremble, and the locked tomes within rattled as if agitated by unseen hands. Suddenly, a low groan echoed from beneath the floorboards, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Dust motes stirred in unnatural spirals, coalescing into a shadowy form that slowly rose from the cracked wood, an amorphous mass of darkness with flickering eyes that burned like embers. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, but the creature's gaze held me rooted in place. Its voice, if it could be called that, was a chorus of broken whispers, fragments of forgotten tongues and lost souls. "You have awakened what was meant to sleep," it intoned, the keeper of forgotten fears and buried truths. "Now the price must be paid." The room shifted again, walls folding like paper, stretching into a vast abyss filled with endless shelves of cursed knowledge. The book in my hands pulsed with an eldritch energy, its pages turning on their own, revealing a ritual, an incantation that promised power but warned of madness. I knew then that my curiosity had become a curse. To escape, I must confront the darkness I had unleashed, tracing the path through nightmare and memory to find the key that would bind the shadows once more. The book's pages fluttered with a life of their own, each turn revealing arcane symbols and cryptic incantations etched in ink darker than the void. The ritual described was a labyrinth of words and gestures, an ancient dance designed to bind restless spirits and seal breaches between worlds. My pulse quickened as I realized the gravity of what lay before me. To wield such power was to walk the razor's edge between salvation and oblivion. Yet, there was no turning back. The shadows had been stirred, and only I could lay them to rest. Guided by the book's eldritch instructions, I gathered the scattered relics and artifacts hidden among the dusty shelves, silver chains tarnished by time, shards of obsidian glass, a cracked ceremonial dagger, and vials of ancient, murky liquid whose origins I dared not question. The whispers followed me like a storm, swirling around my mind and body, filling every corner of the library with a suffocating presence. Shadows lengthened and danced along the cracked walls, their forms twisting into grotesque parodies of human faces. I arranged the ritual circle carefully on the floor, tracing symbols with trembling hands as the book's words echoed in my mind. As I lit candles, the flame flickered erratically, casting twisted shadows that seemed to reach out and grasp at my soul. With the dagger in hand, I began the incantation, my voice trembling but resolute. The air thickened, charged with raw energy. The room seemed to pulse, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring. Suddenly, a violent gust extinguished the candles, plunging me into darkness. The whispers rose to a cacophony, and unseen hands clawed at my skin, dragging me toward the abyss. I fought back with every ounce of will, focusing on the ritual's words, the symbols glowing faintly beneath my fingers. Light burst forth from the circle, searing and pure. The shadows screamed, a soundless wail of rage and despair, as they were drawn back into the pages of the ancient tome. Exhausted, I collapsed as the library's oppressive weight lifted. The book snapped shut, its surface cold and inert. I had sealed the breach, for now. The hollow echo of my footsteps bounced off the warped hardwood floors, the creaks beneath my weight sounding like warnings from the very bones of the building. It was as if the library itself was announcing my intrusion to unseen watchers lurking in the gloom between towering, dust-choked bookshelves. The local history section lay in the farthest corner of the main floor, isolated behind a rusted iron gate hanging crooked on broken hinges, one side completely detached. The books here were unlike the others, ancient tomes bound in leather darkened to the color of dried blood, their spines etched with strange symbols that writhed and shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them, mingled with faded English text. For nearly an hour, I had combed through the shelves, absorbed in the silence, until I caught it, a whisper so faint I thought it might be the building settling or rodents scratching unseen. But as I froze, breath held tight until my lungs ached, the sound resolved into unmistakable murmurs, voices that crawled beneath my skin and vibrated within my skull like a swarm of desperate insects clawing to escape. The murmuring led me to a slender volume nestled between two massive, dust-coated tomes on colonial agriculture. This book bore no title, only shifting markings on its spine that seemed alive. As I lifted it, warmth seeped into my palms, strange for a book that should have long rotted away in this forsaken corner. The whispers surged, no longer distant but echoing inside my mind, telling stories I'd never heard but somehow knew to be true. Tales of Margaret Henley, a seamstress who vanished in 1847, leaving only a puddle of black water and the lingering scent of roses in winter. Of Thomas Bradwell, a merchant found days after his disappearance, eyes replaced by smooth stones, frozen in time. The air thickened, temperature plummeting until I saw my breath mist in the stale atmosphere. Dust motes that once drifted aimlessly now swirled with intent, coalescing into faint, shifting shapes, ghostly figures dancing between reality and nightmare. My heart pounded so fiercely I feared it would burst, cold sweat drenched my shirt. The voices spoke of Elena Voss, the baker's wife who talked to invisible presences in her kitchen, and the townsfolk who glimpsed the apparition of her mother wandering the streets at twilight, her face a haunting mask of confusion and yearning. As the tale unfurled, a presence settled beside me, the subtle pressure of weight on the reading bench, the electric charge of unseen eyes observing. I turned slowly, heart constricting. There she was, a middle-aged woman, clad in a flour-dusted apron, her gaunt face etched with worry. Her lips moved soundlessly, as though words fled her grasp. The impossible, she cast a shadow on the floor, and the wooden bench bore a faint indentation where she sat. When I blinked, she remained, eyes locked on mine, heavy with a terrible self-awareness of her unnatural state, trapped between worlds, a whisper of a life unfinished. The spectral woman's gaze held me captive, her silent lips trembling as if desperate to speak but imprisoned by some invisible force. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized she was not merely a ghost but a fragment of sorrow frozen in time, an echo of a life cut short, trapped within the library's decaying walls. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached out slowly, my fingers trembling, barely daring to touch the air where her hand hovered. The moment my skin brushed the faintest chill that radiated from her, a flood of images crashed through my mind, fleeting scenes of a bustling town square, a hurried departure, whispered accusations, and a final, desperate plea for forgiveness that was never answered. Her eyes, deep pools of regret, locked onto mine with unbearable intensity. It was then I understood, she was a guardian of stories long forgotten, a keeper of truths the town had buried beneath generations of silence. The whispers swelled, not as voices but as a tide of emotions, loss, fear, hope, filling the air with a palpable ache. I knew then that the key to freeing her, and perhaps the many others bound to this place, lay hidden within the pages of the untitled book. But unlocking those secrets would require a journey through pain and memory, a descent into the darkest corners of the town's history and my own soul. The spectral woman's gaze held me captive, her silent lips trembling as if desperate to speak but imprisoned by some invisible force. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized she was not merely a ghost but a fragment of sorrow frozen in time, an echo of a life cut short, trapped within the library's decaying walls. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached out slowly, my fingers trembling, barely daring to touch the air where her hand hovered. The moment my skin brushed the faintest chill that radiated from her, a flood of images crashed through my mind, fleeting scenes of a bustling town square, a hurried departure, whispered accusations, and a final, desperate plea for forgiveness that was never answered. Her eyes, deep pools of regret, locked onto mine with unbearable intensity. It was then I understood, she was a guardian of stories long forgotten, a keeper of truths the town had buried beneath generations of silence. The whispers swelled, not as voices but as a tide of emotions, loss, fear, hope, filling the air with a palpable ache. I knew then that the key to freeing her, and perhaps the many others bound to this place, lay hidden within the pages of the untitled book. But unlocking those secrets would require a journey through pain and memory, a descent into the darkest corners of the town's history and my own soul. The whispers thickened, swirling around me like a gathering storm as more figures materialized from the dust and shadows. Margaret Henley appeared near the fiction section, clutching a sewing basket whose edges flickered between flesh and shadow, her eyes haunted with sorrow. Thomas Bradwell stood rigid between the poetry shelves, his stony gaze reflecting the weak light like polished marbles, an eerie sentinel caught between worlds. I tried to close the book, but my fingers refused to obey. It was as though the whispers had severed the link between mind and muscle, leaving me a passive vessel trapped in my own body. The voices wove relentless tales, recounting a plague of disappearances in the 1850s that swept through the town. Families vanished without trace, leaving only strange symbols carved into doorframes and the lingering scent of ozone after lightning storms. The air around me chilled rapidly, I saw my breath curl in thick clouds that hung unnaturally long. Ice crystals formed on the metal shelves, sparkling ominously in the dim light. The whispers grew urgent, as if racing against a vanishing deadline. The spectral figures grew more solid, their desperate eyes locking onto mine with a suffocating intensity that made my skin crawl. I realized then that the book was no mere storyteller. It was using me as an anchor, pulling these lost souls back from the liminal space between life and death. Each story I absorbed gave them more substance, more reality, binding them through my perception to the physical world from which they'd been torn so long ago. The voices revealed the cause of the disappearances, a ritual gone catastrophically wrong, performed by occultists who sought to peer beyond the veil of death. They opened a tear in reality, swallowing dozens before sealing it, but not killing them. The victims lingered, displaced, caught in a spectral limbo, waiting for someone to give form once more to their fractured existences. My vision blurred as the cold deepened, the figures now casting long, distinct shadows. Footsteps echoed softly as they moved nearer. Eleanor Voss reached out with a translucent hand, her lips mouthing words drowned out by the flood of whispers flowing from the book's blank pages. The tome burned hot against my palms, branding itself into my skin like a curse. The voices rose in a crescendo, overlapping with stories of others who had found the book, curious researchers and locals who became unwitting conduits for the displaced dead. Each eventually abandoned it under the crushing weight of sorrow, but not before adding their voices to the chorus of the lost. Horror gripped me as I realized my fate, to become the next narrator, the next keeper of these stories, trapped in an endless cycle of telling and retelling for whoever might find the book after I was gone. But knowledge was power, and understanding offered choice. Focusing fiercely on my heartbeat, the rhythm of my breathing, the solid weight of my body pressed against the bench, I anchored myself in reality. I was alive. Present. Real. Unlike these lost souls who fed on belief and perception. If I could stop listening, stop believing, I might sever the connection. The whispers turned to screams as I pulled my consciousness away from their narratives. The figures flickered, wavering like candles in a storm. Eleanor Voss's anguished face twisted as she reached for me, her form growing increasingly transparent. Summoning every ounce of will, I slammed the book shut. The gunshot echo shattered the oppressive silence. Instantly, the temperature normalized, the spectral presence dissolved, and the suffocating weight lifted. I was alone once more. The sudden silence was almost deafening. The oppressive atmosphere that had suffocated the air lifted, replaced by a fragile stillness. The spectral figures vanished like smoke caught in a breeze, and the icy chill retreated, leaving the room at its natural temperature once more. I sat back, trembling, the closed book resting heavily on my lap as if it still bore the weight of the countless souls it contained. The whispers had ceased, but their echoes lingered in the corners of my mind, a haunting reminder of the stories I had briefly become part of. For a long moment, I was paralyzed, caught between relief and the creeping fear that this was not truly over. The library, with its crumbling walls and endless stacks, seemed to watch me now, patient and waiting. Gathering my strength, I stood and moved toward the exit. The door groaned on its hinges, and as I stepped outside, the cold night air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the stale heaviness inside. The town was silent, bathed in moonlight that did little to soothe the shadows in my thoughts. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted not by ghosts, but by questions. The book's curse, the spirits bound to forgotten stories, and the ritual that had trapped them, all swirled in my mind like a storm I could neither escape nor control. Despite my efforts to distance myself, the pull of the Blackwood Library remained strong. At times, I glimpsed fleeting shadows in the corner of my vision or felt a sudden chill where none should be. I knew the stories were not finished, not for me, and perhaps not for the town. And deep inside, I understood that knowledge comes at a price. Figures vanished, leaving only settling dust and the lingering scent of roses and ozone. My hands trembled uncontrollably, barely able to hold the book's weight. I knew I couldn't abandon it to fate, leaving it for some unsuspecting soul to find. Yet destruction wasn't an option either. The whispers had made one thing painfully clear: this book was the fragile tether preventing these lost souls from dissolving forever into the void between worlds. Clutching the tome beneath my jacket, I stepped out of the cursed library, burdened with the unfinished stories and the haunting knowledge that somewhere, in the silent space between heartbeats and fleeting thoughts, they still whispered, waiting. Now, the book rests on my desk, closed, untouched, yet never silent. In the dead hours of night, when the world holds its breath, I hear their calls again, pleading, coaxing me to share their tales just once more. And sometimes, God help me, the temptation to listen threatens to overwhelm. Story 8. The silence that gripped the Whitmore building past 3 a.m. was no peaceful stillness. It was predatory, thick, suffocating, alive, waiting with cold patience to strike. Every creak and groan of this forgotten structure seemed deliberate, like measured breaths drawn from some ancient beast. I'd lived there for 6 months, the sole tenant of what once was a prestigious downtown apartment complex. The surrounding blocks had been condemned, leaving the Whitmore a lonely monument to urban decay. The rent was cheap, but some costs weren't measured in dollars. The elevator was the first sign that something was wrong. I told myself it was mechanical quirks. Old buildings had them, pipes that groaned like wounded animals, radiators clanking Morse code to ghosts, doors swinging open on their own. But elevators descending below the ground floor on their own, to floors that shouldn't exist. That defied reason. It began with a faint hum, creeping through my apartment walls around 3:15 a.m. The cables stretched and groaned under weight that wasn't there. I pressed my ear to the wall beside the shaft, feeling vibrations seep into my skull as the elevator descended beyond the basement utility level, into depths absent from blueprints. My mouth dried as sandpaper. I'd studied the Whitmore's blueprints before moving in, 5 floors above ground, 1 basement for utilities. Yet night after night, the elevator journeyed deeper, the groaning retreating but never ceasing. Sleep fled. My body tensed like a drawn wire each night at 3 a.m., muscles coiled in dread anticipation. The elevator's descent became ritual, passing the lobby, basement, and vanishing into impossible depths. By week 3, curiosity outweighed caution. One Thursday night in my 4th month, I stood in the hallway at 2:50 a.m., eyes fixed on the elevator's brass floor indicator. The arrow pointed to the first floor, as expected, but when the descent began, the arrow didn't move. The car was moving far below, but the dial refused to follow. My heart pounded, a caged bird desperate for escape. Sweat beaded on my forehead, the chill of the building gnawing at my skin. Logic offered fragile explanations, counterweights misbalanced, phantom sounds, echoes of the past, but reason slipped away amid the Whitmore's nocturnal impossibilities. That Thursday, when the elevator began its descent, I pressed the call button. The hum halted, suspended like a held breath. Each step echoed hollowly in the cold stairwell, a grim countdown etched in strange letters rather than numbers, B8, B7, B6. The air grew thinner as I climbed, the weight of the underground labyrinth pressing heavily on my chest. My muscles burned with exhaustion, but the primal urge to escape the Whitmore's impossible depths propelled me upward, each frantic leap bringing me closer to the surface, or so I hoped. Faint whispers chased me, the voices of the trapped souls blending into a haunting chorus that echoed off the concrete walls. Their pleas were a desperate litany, begging for release from a prison that twisted time and space into endless corridors of despair. At the landing labeled B1, the stairwell ended abruptly, swallowed by shadow. Ahead, a narrow hallway stretched into blackness, the dim glow of a single flickering bulb casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse like living things. Summoning what little courage remained, I stepped forward. The oppressive silence broke with a sharp intake of breath, mine or something else's, I couldn't tell. The walls closed in, the air thickened, and the faint, metallic taste of blood tingled on my tongue. Then, the corridor warped. The floor buckled beneath me, and I stumbled into a vast chamber that defied all logic. Towering shelves, heavier and older than any in the library above, stretched infinitely in every direction. Ancient tomes floated in midair, pages turning themselves as if possessed. In the center, a massive stone altar bore inscriptions glowing faintly with eldritch light. Around it, shadows gathered, countless figures twisted in agony and longing, their faces blurred by time, their eyes pleading. A voice thundered in my mind, "You have trespassed into the heart of the Whitmore's secret. Here, stories are born and death is rewritten. Will you become the keeper or become lost like the rest?" My blood ran cold. The choice lay before me, succumb to the building's eternal grasp or fight to unravel the dark history woven into its very foundation. The asphalt stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by darkness so complete it seemed to devour my headlights before they could pierce more than 20 feet into the void. No moon hung in the sky tonight, no stars to guide me, only the hypnotic rhythm of yellow lines vanishing beneath my truck's wheels and the steady hum of the engine, my sole companion for these last 3 hours. I shouldn't have taken this route. The GPS had offered 3 options to get back to Denver for my brother's funeral in small-town Nebraska, and I'd chosen the longest, loneliest path. Maybe I craved solitude to process the loss. Or maybe I was simply avoiding the inevitable return to an empty apartment, where his absence would crash over me like a physical blow once again. Then, out of the corner of my eye, the rearview mirror flickered with movement, a shadow separating from shadow, a shape moving alongside me. I jerked my eyes upward, expecting only the red glow of my tail lights painting the road behind, but instead I saw something else. A figure, keeping pace with my truck, sliding alongside with an unsettling fluidity that clenched my stomach with icy fear. I pressed the accelerator harder, the speedometer needle jumped from 60 to 70, then 75 miles per hour. The shape in the mirror matched my acceleration perfectly, its position unwavering. My palms slicked with sweat, gripping the worn leather wool so tightly I left damp prints. When I glanced at the passenger side mirror, my breath caught. Another figure ran beside the truck, closer now, moving with eerie precision that mimicked every subtle shift as I adjusted the vehicle's course. They moved in perfect synchronization, like distorted reflections of myself, yet something was profoundly wrong. My heart hammered fiercely, pounding in my throat. Rational thoughts scrambled, fatigue hallucinations, grief-induced stress, even carbon monoxide poisoning. But the figures remained, tangible presences pressing against the glass, as if trying to break through. Panicking, I slammed on the brakes. The truck lurched violently, gravel crunching beneath the tires as I veered onto the narrow shoulder. Silence crashed in, deafening after hours of engine noise. I sat motionless, chest heaving, willing my vision to clear, hoping logic would reclaim its dominion. But the mirrors reflected only the empty road stretching behind me. Relief surged, quickly replaced by bitter embarrassment. Was I losing my mind? The funeral stress, the isolation, the long drive, too much for a weary soul. I reached for the radio, desperate for sound to shatter the oppressive quiet pressing against my eardrums. Static filled the cabin, harsh and grating. Turning the dial, I searched for any station to cut through this remote stretch of highway. The needle swept across the band, capturing nothing but white noise and, occasionally, faint crackles that twisted into whispers, voices, perhaps, just beyond comprehension. The voice was unmistakably Michael's, calm, urgent, pleading through the static as if sitting right beside me. "James, if you're listening, you need to understand something important." My blood ran cold. My hands trembled, gripping the radio, its green display flickering with static frequency numbers. It wasn't possible. Michael had been dead for 3 days. I'd seen his casket, watched it lowered into the earth just this morning. But the voice persisted, tinged with static yet achingly clear. "The road remembers everything, James. Every soul who's traveled it, every thought they carried, every fear they tried to leave behind." My throat tightened, swallowing hard. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill slipping through the truck's seals. I scrambled for the power button, desperate to silence the impossible message. But my finger barely touched it before Michael's voice rose, insistent. "You have to keep driving, James. Don't stop again. Don't look in the mirrors. The ones who walk beside the road, they're not meant for the living to see. But once you've seen them..." I yanked my hand away as if burned. The fragile threads of logic I'd clung to shredded like wet paper. This was no hallucination, no carbon monoxide poisoning. Something unnatural gripped this stretch of highway, a truth I was only beginning to grasp. The engine thrummed beneath me, a low vibration through the pedals, the promise of escape. I reached for the gear shift, but then movement in my peripheral vision froze me solid. They were back. Not lurking in the mirrors this time, but standing directly beside the truck, tall, elongated figures forged from the same abyssal darkness swallowing the horizon. They stood motionless, perfectly poised where they'd appeared when the truck was moving, as if they had materialized the moment I stopped. My breathing shortened, ragged, each inhale insufficient. The air itself seemed thin, as if they'd leached its substance away. The figures didn't approach, but their presence radiated a cold that seeped through metal and glass, settling into my bones like icy arthritis. One turned its head slowly toward me. No discernible features, but I felt the crushing weight of its gaze, pressing against my chest. Black spots danced on the edge of my vision. The radio crackled again, Michael's voice, sharp and clear cutting through static. "There are echoes, James. Impressions left behind by those traveling this road between states of being, caught between living and the beyond. The road holds on to them. Keeps them walking." I forced my gaze away from the figure, focusing on the green glow of the radio, the terrible truth dawning cold and heavy. Michael had driven this same road 6 months ago, just after his diagnosis. He'd been distant then, part of him already elsewhere. I'd driven here last spring, already changing, becoming something between life and death. The road had captured that moment, preserved it. Now, I was among those caught in transition. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The figures outside remained motionless, but their patience was infinite. They would wait as long as necessary. But I did not. "You have to drive, James. Drive and don't stop. No matter what you see or hear. The road only holds you if you let it. Keep moving, and you'll reach the end before it traps you like it trapped us." I slammed the truck into drive and floored the accelerator. gravel sprayed behind as the tires fought for traction, then caught, propelling me back onto the asphalt with a screech. The shadowy figures began running alongside again, their forms rippling and flowing like liquid darkness. But now, there were many more, an endless procession of souls bound to this cursed road. They filled both mirrors, a river of darkness flowing alongside me, keeping perfect pace as my desperation pushed the speedometer from 80 to 90 miles per hour. The truck shuddered under the strain, but slowing down was unthinkable. Michael's voice crackled through the radio, fragments of explanation and encouragement barely piercing the fog of terror clouding my mind. Then I saw it. The curve. The road bent sharply to the left, swallowed by skeletal trees, but beyond the bend glowed an eerie light. Not the warm, golden hue of a town's welcome, but the cold, merciless blue-white gleam of headlights. My own headlights. I was approaching myself. The revelation slammed into my chest like a fist. The road wasn't chasing me, it was looping back, a closed circuit trapping me in eternal recurrence. The shadowy figures weren't hunters, they were guides, herding me toward this inevitable moment. No, I whispered, voice raw and trembling. No, no, no. But the image was clear, my truck rounding the bend, eyes wide with the same paralyzing fear, a mirror of my own terror. Seconds away from collision, the radio erupted into chaos, not just Michael's voice, but dozens, a cacophony of desperate warnings and fractured instructions. Words tangled and blurred, keys to escape lost in meaningless noise. The distance shrank, 50 yards, 40, 30. At the last heartbeat, I yanked the steering wheel hard right, sending the truck skidding off the road into a barren field. The rough earth bucked beneath me as headlights swept wildly across dead grass and scattered stones. Behind, the other truck, the one that was me, continued down the looping road, tail lights vanishing around the bend. Silence swallowed the night. The engine died. Heart hammering, I sat in the field's emptiness. The radio was mute. The mirrors reflected only black. I dared a glance back toward the road. It was gone. No asphalt, no yellow lines, no endless procession of shadowy figures. Just a vast field stretching endlessly, the world stripped bare. I tried the ignition again, nothing. The dashboard flickered once, then faded, plunging me into darkness. As my eyes adjusted, shapes emerged far off, not shadows, but structures. Buildings. Real buildings. Lights glowing in windows. With no other choice, I left the truck and began walking, toward salvation or perhaps another snare. Each step unsettled me. The earth beneath felt too soft, unnervingly unstable, as though the ground had lost its solidity, slipping toward entropy. Gradually, the shape solidified into a small town outline. I stumbled into the first street, catching sight of a sign, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 247. Millbrook wasn't on any map I'd checked. I'd never heard of it. Yet it was real, and I was alive to see it. An hour later, the local sheriff found me wandering the main street, disheveled and muttering about impossible roads and shadow figures. He listened patiently, as one used to broken travelers shattered by isolation and madness. When I asked about the truck, he explained it had been found abandoned on Highway 34, some 50 miles south. There was no field where I'd crashed, no looping road where I'd fled. But when I pressed him about the radio transmission, about hearing my dead brother's voice, his expression changed. He studied me silently, then murmured that there had been other reports over the years, others who'd seen the figures, heard the voices, and returned with stories that defied reason. Millbrook wasn't just a town. It was a sanctuary, or perhaps a liminal space, an intersection between reality and the road's restless shadows. And I knew, somewhere deep inside, that my journey was far from over. Travelers on certain stretches of highway claimed to hear voices of people they'd lost, to see figures mirroring their movements in windows and rearview mirrors. The sheriff drove me to my truck himself, navigating familiar highways and landmarks that made sense in this waking world. When we reached my vehicle, it started without hesitation, no sign of the failure that had stranded me in that impossible field. I searched for that road again afterward, but it seemed to vanish from every map and GPS system I consulted. No detours, no secret paths. Just the official route, well documented, devoid of any trace of that stretch of asphalt where the dead walked beside the living. But sometimes, late at night, when I drive alone, I catch a flicker in my peripheral vision, a shadow keeping pace, matching my movements just a little too perfectly. And when I tune the radio to static-filled frequencies, faint voices emerge, not only Michael's but others caught between this life and the next. Their impressions are etched deep into highways that remember every traveler's story. Now I drive faster whenever those shadows appear. I never stop, not until I reach my destination. Because I learned something on that impossible road, something chilling to the bone. The boundary between the living and the dead is thinner than we like to admit. There are places where it wears away, where echoes of transition linger like stains that never fully wash away. The road remembers everything. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to travel it at the wrong time, in the wrong frame of mind, it remembers you, too. Story 10. The silence inside Meridian Contemporary Gallery after closing hours wasn't peaceful. It was predatory, slithering over polished concrete floors and climbing stark white walls like a living thing, waiting. LED spotlights carved harsh pools of clinical light, leaving everything else to drown in shadow. The resulting checkerboard of brightness and darkness made every corner a potential hiding place. I'd worked nights there for 3 months. At first, it seemed a blessing, good pay, a quiet environment, and plenty of time to read during my hourly rounds. The gallery specialized in contemporary art, abstract paintings, conceptual installations, and pieces that left visitors scratching their heads, wondering if their 5-year-old could do better. Nothing that should have disturbed me during downtime. Nothing that should have made my skin crawl as I passed certain pieces. But the unease began small, like all the worst things do. During my second week, I noticed something odd about a painting in the East Wing, a large canvas dominated by swirling blues and grays. The placard identified it as Urban Solitude No. 7, by an artist I'd never heard of. The painting depicted what looked like a subway platform, though the loose brush strokes left the scene open to interpretation. What caught my attention wasn't the style or colors but a figure I hadn't noticed before. I stood frozen for 5 minutes during my 2 a.m. round, staring under the harsh spotlight. The figure was barely more than a dark smudge against the platform, a person waiting for a train, maybe. My eyes burned, and I told myself it was just shadow playing tricks on the textured paint. Artists were clever that way, creating illusions that made viewers see what wasn't there. The next night, the figure was clearer. My heart rate spiked as I approached Urban Solitude No. 7, flashlight beam trembling on the wall beside it. The figure was undeniably human-shaped, a man, it seemed, from the silhouette. He faced away from the viewer, staring down the tunnel as if waiting for something that would never arrive. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Then immediately felt foolish. What was I going to do? Compare it to photos on the gallery's website? Report to my supervisor that I thought a painting was changing? I'd likely be out of a job and probably sent for a psychiatric evaluation. Yet, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. After that night, the gallery felt different. The silence no longer soothed, it pressed against my eardrums, making my own pulse thunder inside my skull. Every creak of the settling building, every hum from the climate control, even distant street sounds forced me to halt mid-step, straining to listen. My rounds became exercises in controlled terror, each corner a potential encounter with something nameless, lurking just beyond sight. By week's end, 3 more paintings had developed similar shadowy figures. Morning commute in the North Gallery now showed a shadowed person waiting at a bus stop, barely visible through what the artist had painted as rain-streaked glass. Neighborhood Watch featured a dark shape standing behind a window in a suburban house, a figure so indistinct it could have been a curtain or trick of light. Coffee Shop Chronicles had gained a lone customer sitting at a corner table, their face obscured strategically by a hanging plant. The worst part wasn't just their appearance, it was their posture. Though abstract, these figures conveyed a chilling focus, like observers watching something beyond the painting's frame. My hands trembled on my rounds. I gripped my flashlight so tightly my knuckles went white, holding my breath as I approached each piece. The heating system's metallic groans nearly made me jump out of my skin. My mouth went dry in every gallery space, so I carried a water bottle to combat the constant, creeping thirst born of stress. One night during lunch, I dove into the gallery's history. The building itself was relatively new, only 15 years old, purpose-built for Meridian Contemporary. But the land had a deeper past. It had once held an old art studio owned by Marcus Thorne, a painter who died in the late 1980s. Sparse records described his work as psychologically disturbing, voyeuristic in unsettling ways. The connection felt tenuous, almost laughable, but I couldn't shake it. I began scrutinizing the shadowy figures, noticing something chilling. The same observer appeared repeatedly across multiple paintings. The figure in Urban Solitude No. 7 slouched with the same shoulders as the one in Coffee Shop Chronicles. The shape behind the window in Neighborhood Watch matched the stance of the figure at the bus stop in Morning Commute. They weren't random. They were the same watcher, observing different scenes from different angles. And, hauntingly, he looked like me. The realization hit during my 4 a.m. round in front of Urban Solitude No. 7. Close enough for my breath to fog the protective glass, I saw the figure on the subway platform, my height, build, the familiar cock of my hip. Dark brushstrokes mimicked my unruly hair falling across my forehead exactly as it did when I forgot to use gel. My breath hitched. The gallery seemed to shrink, the walls closing in like a cage. I stumbled back, vision tunneling as panic surged. The climate control hummed louder, or maybe my senses had sharpened to a painful edge. Every sound amplified, my footsteps on polished concrete, the rustle of my uniform, the rasp of my ragged breathing. I forced myself to look at the other paintings. The figure in Coffee Shop Chronicles showed my profile. And somewhere between brush and shadow, the watcher's gaze was fixed on me. I was certain of it now. The nose, the jawline, the subtle tilt of the head when focused, it was all wrong in the way funhouse mirrors twist familiar faces, distorted yet undeniably mine. The person lurking behind the window in Neighborhood Watch had my posture, that particular way I stood when trying to disappear into the background. But they weren't gazing into emptiness anymore. Each figure now fixated on something specific within their painted worlds. And when I followed their eyes, I saw him. In Urban Solitude No. 7, across the subway platform from my shadow self, stood another figure. Painted with far more detail and care, though still impressionistic in style, it was a man in a security guard's uniform, holding a flashlight, looking lost, confused. It had my face. Not a vague shadow or blurred silhouette, but my actual face rendered meticulously in brush strokes. The artist had captured the slight scar above my left eyebrow, the way my ear protruded just a bit too much, the perpetual 5 o'clock shadow I could never quite banish. I was inside the painting. I was being watched, by myself. This pattern repeated across every canvas that had taken on these ghostly figures. In Coffee Shop Chronicles, I sat at a table near the window, nursing a coffee and staring down at my phone, oblivious to the watcher lurking in the corner. In Neighborhood Watch, I moved through what looked like my own apartment, seen through a window and silently studied by the figure standing across the street. The paintings weren't just art anymore, they were documenting my life. My legs weakened, forcing me to lean against the gallery wall to avoid collapse. The harsh LED light streaked across my vision as the gallery spun. My heart pounded so violently I felt it lodge in my throat. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead and down my spine. I tried to rationalize it: stress, sleep deprivation, perhaps a psychological break from too many solitary nights in this unsettling place. But when I looked again, the details remained perfect, haunting, impossible. More paintings changed over the following nights. Laundromat Blues gained a watcher behind the window as a man, identical to me, folded clothes at 2 in the morning. Gas Station Nocturne showed me pumping gas, while a shadowy figure lurked beside the air pump. All Night Diner featured me eating alone at the counter, under the watchful eye of someone in a back booth. The watchers grew bolder, closer, more detailed. The figure in Urban Solitude number 7 moved from the far platform's edge to mere feet away from my painted self. The observer in Coffee Shop Chronicles switched tables, now close enough to eavesdrop on conversations. And now, they all stared directly out of their frames, locking eyes with me as I made my rounds. The gallery transformed into a maze of surveillance. Each painting became a window through which multiple versions of me watched. A man who looked exactly like me live parallel lives painted in brush and shadow. The watchers had my face, but their eyes were hollow voids, dark and unblinking as they tracked me through the real gallery. When I passed morning commute, the watcher at the bus stop followed my movements until I slipped from his painted line of sight. Sleep fled me during breaks. Every time I closed my eyes, the sensation of their gaze haunted me, waiting. My hands trembled incessantly, dropping my flashlight, keys, phone. My water bottle was never full for long, and my mouth stayed parched no matter how much I drank. The building's nocturnal symphony worsened. The heating system groaned mechanically like whispered secrets. The creaking structure echoed footsteps that weren't mine. The gallery was alive, watching, and I was the hunted. More intense, pleading, almost furious, as if sensing their grip weakening. The walls seemed to pulse with their restless energy, the gallery shrinking into a pressure cooker of tangled realities. In Coffee Shop Chronicles, the figure no longer sat calmly but leaned forward, fingers curling against the invisible glass, trying to reach beyond their painted prison. In Neighborhood Watch, the watcher's shadow stretched impossibly long, creeping toward me like a dark tide ready to surge. The air thickened, every breath weighted with a cold unease. The lights flickered erratically, casting the room into strobing shadows that mimicked the growing unrest within the canvases. Then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, the observers stepped beyond their frames, not physically, but in the charged energy that filled the space between art and reality. The gallery became a battleground, a thin membrane between worlds where I fought to reclaim my existence. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the painted watcher's hollow eyes locked onto mine again. I wasn't just resisting their gaze, I was challenging it, forcing their world to fracture. The final painting I faced was Urban Solitude number 7. I stepped close, breath shallow, and stared unflinchingly into the eyes of my shadow self, the observer who had once stolen my reality. And then, the painted figure smiled. Not with warmth, but with a knowing, chilling certainty. A silent promise that this struggle was far from over. The gallery's silence deepened into something thicker, almost sentient. I realized then that to break free, I'd have to do more than just stare back. I'd have to enter their world, confront the darkness that had painted me as prey, and wrest back what was mine. The hunger in the watchers grew more desperate, more raw. In Coffee Shop Chronicles, the watcher stood abruptly, pressing his face against where the invisible glass between worlds should have been. His features distorted, smeared like wet paint, as if desperate to break free from the canvas prison. The gallery filled with sounds that had no earthly source, whispers in ancient, unrecognizable tongues, footsteps echoing from empty halls, the ghostly scratch of brushes against unseen canvases where no artist toiled. The temperature plummeted until my breath became visible, swirling in pale clouds. LED lights flickered in erratic, strobing patterns that stabbed at my eyes, forcing me to look away. At Urban Solitude number 7, my painted self had almost vanished, reduced to a faint smudge on the platform's worn surface. Meanwhile, the observer clung fiercely to his stolen reality. He'd shifted to the very edge of the frame, reaching out with a trembling hand, straining to bridge the impossible gap between painted world and mine. I felt the tug, the seductive pull to meet his grasp. Part of me longed to let go, to slip willingly into that flat, two-dimensional existence where bills vanished, loneliness faded, and the crushing weight of flesh and bone was lifted. The painted realm promised permanence and simplicity, a seductive escape from my restless anxiety. But I knew the true price. Instead of reaching forward, I stepped back. Then further back. Creating distance from every canvas, breaking the eye contact that fueled the watcher's stolen substance. Without my focus, they dissolved, blurring back into abstract shadows. Their whispers grew frantic, pleading, but I moved through the gallery like a shadow myself, denying them the attention they craved. The light steadied, ceasing their tormenting flickers. The temperature climbed back to familiar warmth. The phantom noises receded into nothingness, leaving only the hum of climate control. By dawn, the paintings had restored themselves to mere abstraction, no watchers, no shadows, no hint of life beyond their frames. I resigned that morning, citing personal reasons. The day's supervisor was unsurprised. The gallery had a high turnover for night security, though she offered no details why. I never returned to see if the watchers had returned to study whoever replaced me. But sometimes, in store windows, car mirrors, or the black glass of my phone, I catch my reflection, and notice my shadow has grown deeper, fuller. As if I'd reclaimed not just myself, but a fragment of the painted world's stolen substance. The experience changed me. I remain acutely aware of eyes upon me, felt but unseen, in crowded places and silent moments. At night, alone in my apartment, I wonder if other galleries exist, other boundaries between reality and representation wearing thin. I imagine other night guards, standing watch, facing the painted watchers, wondering if they'll dare reach out or pull away. I hope they choose wisely. Because the painted world always watches, always waits. It offers a seductive escape to the weary, the lonely, the desperate, but at a cost. The gallery lost its grip on me, but the knowledge it imparted lingers. We are all observed, by versions of ourselves that live parallel, shadowed lives just beyond perception. The question is not if we are watched, but whether we remain watchers, or become the watched. I chose to hold on to my 3 dimensions. But that choice has stolen my peace of mind. The lanterns floated silently, their ghostly glow illuminating the path with an otherworldly light that seemed too cold, too unnatural to be cast by any earthly flame. My heart hammered in my chest as I debated whether to follow or retreat. But something deeper than curiosity, some primal thread woven into my blood, urged me forward. I stepped outside, the night air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, mingled with a faint sweetness that made my stomach twist. The ground beneath my boots was soft, as if the land itself was breathing beneath my feet. The trees, their twisted branches still clawing at the sky, seemed to lean in closer, whispering secrets I could almost understand. The lantern procession led me through the overgrown path, past tangled hedgerows and ancient stone markers covered in moss. Each step felt heavier, as if I were wading deeper into a dream, or a nightmare, from which there might be no waking. Ahead, the trail opened into a clearing bathed in silvery moonlight. At its center stood a circle of standing stones, weathered and cracked, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with a pale light. The lanterns hovered above the stones, casting eerie patterns that writhed and danced like living shadows. I swallowed hard, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. The silence here was not empty, it was waiting, expectant, thick with an ancient power that seemed to seep from the very stones themselves. Then, from the circle's heart, a figure emerged, tall and gaunt, wrapped in tattered robes that fluttered though no breeze stirred. Its face was obscured beneath a hood, but the eyes, pale and glowing faintly blue, locked onto mine with a terrible intensity. "You have come," the voice whispered, not from the figure's mouth but from all around me, a chorus of ancient echoes that wrapped the night in their chill. I took a shaky step forward, my voice barely audible. "What is this place? What do you want?" The figure's hands rose, skeletal fingers tracing shapes in the air that shimmered and folded like smoke. "This is the threshold," it said. "The place where the living and the lost intersect. Your blood calls you here. The blood of Ezra, the last keeper of secrets." The air thickened, the lanterns pulsing faster, casting frantic shadows that twisted and writhed around me. Images flooded my mind, faces I'd never seen, memories not my own, whispers of ancient rituals meant to bind worlds together and keep darkness at bay. You carry a legacy, the figure intoned. The choice is yours. To turn away and forget, or to embrace the truth and bear the burden of remembrance. But beware, for the price is steep, and the watchers never rest. I swallowed hard, the weight of the night pressing down as I realized this inheritance was far more than land or house. It was a gate, a crossing point, a responsibility that tethered me to secrets darker than any family tale. The lantern's glow intensified, flooding the clearing with spectral light, and I knew that whatever choice I made next would change me forever. A chorus of guttural breaths, slow and deliberate, echoing from the very soil beneath me. The air thickened, growing heavy with the scent of blood and damp earth, as if the ground itself was exhaling a long-held grievance. The lantern's light twisted and warped, casting jagged shadows that crawled up my arms like serpents. My heart hammered in panic, yet my limbs felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. Then, a whisper slipped through the stillness, not a plea, but a cold decree, remember us. The words reverberated through the clearing, vibrating in my bones, binding me to the legacy I'd tried to flee. Shapes began to form within the swirling mist, figures draped in tattered cloaks, their faces veiled in darkness, yet eyes blazing with eternal sorrow and wrath. They circled me slowly, guardians of a curse born of bloodshed and betrayal. I trembled, realizing that this night was not just a reckoning for Ezra's sins, but for my entire lineage. The past was alive, and it demanded to be acknowledged. With a surge of will, I forced myself to stand, defying the spectral tribunal. I see you. I hear you, I said, voice shaking but resolute. Tell me what must be done to break this chain. The lead figure stepped forward, a spectral hand reaching toward my chest. Its touch was colder than the grave, yet instead of pain, I felt a strange clarity seep into my soul. You must bear our stories, carry our truths beyond the silence, it intoned. Only through remembrance and confession can the cycle be broken. Your voice will be the beacon that guides us home. The lanterns flickered, and the figures began to fade, their forms unraveling like smoke caught in the dawn's first light. As the clearing returned to its natural stillness, I knew my journey was just beginning. The inheritance was no longer land or buildings, but a burden of truth, a task to unearth and honor the forgotten, to face darkness so that others might walk free. A voice unlike any I'd ever heard on the airwaves before, soft, crackling, and distant as if broadcast from another time. It was a woman's voice, melodic yet filled with an undercurrent of sadness and urgency. She spoke in riddles, a string of cryptic phrases that seemed to fold in on themselves. The past is a mirror fractured by silence. Voices buried beneath dust and decay. Listen closely, the forgotten awaken when the dial finds its secret. I froze, the tuning knob slipping from my grasp. The room grew colder, the weight of the voice settling deep in my bones like a long-lost warning. I adjusted the dial minutely, and the static swelled to fill the room, then faded back to silence. But the echo of those words lingered, reverberating in my mind. Over the next nights, I became obsessed with the radio. Each time I turned the dial, strange fragments emerged, half-heard conversations, muffled laughter, sobbing echoes, and fleeting mentions of names and places I'd never heard of but felt inexplicably drawn to. One night, as the clock struck 3:03 a.m., the radio burst into a clear transmission unlike any before. Find the house where shadows sleep beneath the floorboards. Unlock the door that was never meant to open. Release the silence, or become its prisoner. The words chilled me, but they also sparked a fierce curiosity I couldn't deny. That voice was calling me deeper into a mystery I hadn't yet begun to understand, a mystery embedded in the bones of this house and the voices trapped inside the radio's frequencies. Compelled by a mixture of terror and fascination. Every evening at precisely 2:58 a.m., the static would thin, the crackling would fade, and the announcer's voice would return. Each broadcast peeling back another layer of the house's dark past. One night, the voice spoke directly to me. To the current resident of 1247, Maple Street, beware what lingers beneath your feet. The basement holds memories better left undisturbed. The shadows there do not sleep, they watch, they wait, and they hunger. I couldn't resist any longer. The key in my pocket felt heavier with dread as I approached the basement door. The old brass handle was icy cold to the touch, and the air around it seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin like a living force. With a trembling hand, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The stairs plunged into darkness, swallowing the faint light from above. As I descended, the familiar scent of damp earth and mold gave way to something far older and fouler, the unmistakable stench of sulfur and decay. The beam of my flashlight cut through the oppressive blackness, revealing faded symbols carved deep into the stone walls, symbols that seemed to writhe and pulse when I wasn't looking directly at them. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath emerged in visible puffs. Then, from the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement. Shapes coalesced in the shadows, figures that were not entirely human, faces twisted in silent screams and mouths agape in wordless pleas. They reached out with elongated fingers, beckoning me deeper into the darkness. The radio's voice echoed in my mind, warning, urging, yet I was already drawn into the house's sinister heartbeat. The road behind me seemed to stretch endlessly, each mile swallowing the haunted silhouette of my old house, but no matter how far I drove, the weight of those shadows clung to me, an invisible shroud tightening with every heartbeat. The radio's voice echoed relentlessly in my mind, an unbroken loop of warnings and whispers that refused to fade. In the safety of my car, I glanced once more at the device I'd taken with me, the ancient Philco radio, its dials now cold and silent. Yet I knew it was only a matter of time before it hummed back to life, that spectral announcer calling me home, urging me to listen again. The inheritance of 1247, Maple Street was more than land and walls, it was a legacy of lingering echoes, a doorway between worlds opened long ago, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to cross the threshold. I realized then that escape might not be possible. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. And some voices, once heard, become a part of you forever. The glow was faint but unmistakably alive, a gentle pulse of light that seemed to breathe with its own slow rhythm. I swallowed hard and pushed onward, each step heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted my ascent. The farther I climbed, the stronger the light grew, washing the narrow staircase in a cold, ethereal luminescence that felt both inviting and forbidding. When I finally reached the lantern room at the top, the source revealed itself, not the beacon I had expected, but a fractured orb of translucent crystal suspended from the ceiling by rusted chains. The orb emitted a pale blue glow, casting fractured shadows that seemed to shift independently from the light, as if animated by some unseen force. The walls around me were covered in carvings, symbols, ancient and arcane, etched deep into the stone. Some resembled nautical charts, others strange sigils that made my skin crawl with the sense that they were warnings meant to be heeded but long forgotten by time. At the center of the room lay a weathered logbook, its leather cover cracked but the pages surprisingly intact. I opened it cautiously. The ink inside was faded but legible, entries dated back to the mid-1800s. The author, a lighthouse keeper named Elias Morrow, wrote of strange lights in the fog, eerie voices carried on the wind, and apparitions of ships long sunk beneath the waves. His final entries grew frantic, warning of a veil thinning between worlds, and shadows rising from the depths to claim the light. As I read, the glow from the orb pulsed stronger, filling the room with an unnatural chill. The wind outside howled through broken windows, carrying whispers that I couldn't quite understand but felt deep in my bones. The island, the lighthouse, it was a nexus. A place where the veil between our reality and another, darker realm, was thin and fragile. The stories in the logbook were more than superstition, they were desperate attempts to warn future visitors to stay away, to not disturb what lurked beneath the waves. I knew then that I was not alone in the tower. Something watched me from the shadows, patient, waiting for the veil to part completely. The air thickened, charged with a tension that made my skin prickle. Their luminous bodies pulsed in unison, casting ghostly reflections that rippled like waves across the chamber walls. I felt my heart pounding not just in my chest, but in my very bones, a desperate drumbeat counting down a moment I was powerless to stop. A ripple passed through the crowd of phantoms, and one figure, taller than the rest, detached itself and floated forward with deliberate grace. Its form shimmered like liquid starlight, yet its eyes, deep wells of shadow within the glow, locked onto mine with unsettling clarity. The silence between us stretched taut, a fragile thread suspended over an abyss. Then, the figure spoke, not with words, but with a feeling. A flood of memories and emotions surged into me, vivid and raw, the relentless pounding of ocean storms, the blinding flash of lightning splitting the sky, the unbearable loneliness of a keeper isolated on an island forgotten by time. It was Elias Morrow, the lighthouse keeper from the logbook, trapped in this spectral existence, caught between worlds by the same veil that was now thinning around me. I tried to respond, but my voice was swallowed by the heavy air. Instead, I raised a trembling hand, mirroring the gesture of the phantom before me. A surge of warmth burst through the chill, momentarily pushing back the dissolving edges of my body. A chorus of whispers echoed, voices of the lost and forgotten, pleading for release, for an end to their endless vigil. The lighthouse itself seemed to pulse in sympathy, its stone bones humming with a sorrow older than memory. Realizing that this spectral prison was not only a beacon for ships but a prison for souls, I knew I had to act, to find a way to restore the light, to mend the veil before I, too, became a ghost wandering these haunted heights forever. But the question loomed like the tempest beyond the windows: how does one rekindle a light that has long since died? Tread carefully, for some doors once opened can never be closed again. Some lights, once seen, forever mark the soul. And some places, like that cursed lighthouse, hold their own kind of eternal darkness beneath the surface of their glow. The images played on, relentless and intimate, peeling back the layers of my private life with unsettling clarity. I saw myself laugh, frown, hesitate, moments no stranger should witness, let alone a silent audience cloaked in shadow. The faceless watchers remained ever present, shadows at the edges of every frame, their presence more than just background figures. They were a sinister chorus to the quiet narration of my life unraveling. My heart hammered like a warning drum, echoing the ancient fears buried in human consciousness, the dread of being watched, exposed, and powerless. Yet, no matter how fiercely I willed it, I couldn't tear my eyes away. Each scene seemed to pull me deeper into a trap woven from memory and surveillance, stitched tight with strands of dread and inevitability. The film ended not with credits but a single image, a doorway, ajar, leading into darkness so deep it swallowed the light of the screen. The whispered echo of a voice, my voice, began to speak, soft and fragmented, as if breaking through the veil of time and space. You are not alone. We are always watching. The house lights flickered and slowly brightened, revealing the empty theater seats around me, but the weight of unseen eyes lingered in the air. As I stood and made my way toward the exit, every shadow along the walls seemed to stretch, reaching out like silent fingers urging me to stay. Outside, the night air was cool but carried a whisper of the impossible, a hint that the film was no mere recording but a living, breathing entity. It was a portal, a warning, and a curse wrapped into one. The Paramount wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a nexus where reality and memory converged, where watchers became the watched, and where some stories refused to end. The old man's eyes followed me, unblinking, as if he could see beyond the thin veil separating our worlds. The air in the lobby felt charged, almost electric, humming with a silent promise of things yet to come. I stepped outside, the cool night air a harsh contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the theater. Yet even in the open, the shadows clung to me, stretching longer and darker than any natural source should allow. Days passed, but the weight of what I'd seen refused to lift. My apartment no longer felt like a refuge, it was a stage, a cage, and a prism through which countless unseen eyes watched my every move. The figures weren't just shadows in a film anymore, they had become permanent actors in the theater of my life. Sometimes, at the edge of my vision, I would catch a flicker, a hint of a shape dissolving into the wallpaper, a faint echo of footsteps where none should be. My dreams turned into restless wanderings through empty auditoriums, the velvet seats occupied by silent watchers whose faces remained hidden just beyond my sight. I realized, with a chill deeper than any winter night, that the film had not been a record of my past but a map, a projection of a space between realities where the observed become forever entangled with their watchers. And somewhere, in the depths of that darkened theater, the eyes still wait. Waiting for the moment when I will no longer be a mere spectator, but a part of the endless performance itself. The figures, those spectral watchers, were no longer confined to the edges of my vision or the peripheries of my life. They existed within my sight, persistent and undeniable, like a poison slowly seeping into every moment. I blinked, trying to dispel the image, but the shapes remained, shifting with deliberate grace, sliding past my furniture, brushing against the light. The film's perspective stayed with me, the boundary between reality and recorded nightmare melting away. I could feel the cold breath of their presence on my skin, the silent weight of their gaze pressing deeper into my consciousness. The world became layered, two realities collapsing into one, a waking nightmare where the watchers no longer needed the screen to observe me. They were here. A sharp chill ran down my spine as the figures turned their hollow eyes directly toward me. Their mouths opened in silent invitation or accusation, I couldn't tell which. A terrible yearning filled the air, a hunger that was ancient and relentless. I tried to pull away from the screen, to shut off the projector, to reclaim the fragile sanctuary of my own life. But my limbs felt heavy, as though tethered by unseen chains woven from fear and fascination. The watcher closest to me on screen reached out, its elongated fingers extending beyond the frame as if to cross the divide between painted world and flesh and bone. My heart thundered in my chest, and in that moment, the air around me thickened, pulsing in time with the figure's silent cadence. The theater's oppressive silence shattered as a low murmur rose, growing into a chorus of whispered voices echoing from the shadows, voices from beyond the frames, beyond time, beyond understanding. And then the screen went black. But the watchers were not gone. They were waiting, in the dark, in the corners of the room, in the fragile space between watching and being watched, patiently, endlessly, hungering for the moment when I would no longer resist, when I would become both the observer and the observed, forever entwined in the painted world's unending gaze. The forest around me felt suspended in time, a pocket where every leaf hung frozen, every shadow stretched indefinitely, and the natural rhythms of life had been cruelly paused. The absence of sound was louder than any noise, pressing in on my mind with a suffocating weight. I took a hesitant step forward, my boots crunching on brittle pine needles that hadn't yet fallen, but even that slight disturbance seemed to ripple through the frozen air like a stone tossed into still water. The trees loomed as silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers in a slow, eternal grasp. As I moved deeper, the oppressive quiet didn't relent, it grew heavier, like the breath of something unseen watching, waiting. The trail beneath my feet twisted and curved in ways that defied memory, familiar paths bent into impossibilities, folding back on themselves like a nightmare maze. Suddenly, I caught a flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting against the backdrop of stillness, a movement too deliberate to be a trick of light or wind. I stopped dead. The hair on my neck stood rigid as the atmosphere thickened around me, every instinct screaming for flight, yet my body was rooted, ensnared by the invisible web of anticipation. From the depths of that frozen silence, a sound emerged, faint at first, like distant whispers carried on a breath of wind, then growing clearer. It was not a voice, but a chorus of sighs, of regrets and forgotten memories, trapped between moments like leaves caught in a silent storm. The weight of endless time pressed down, and I felt the pull of something ancient and relentless, calling me toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. In that moment, I understood, here, in this suspended forest, time itself had fractured, no longer a steady flow, but a wound bleeding into the fabric of reality. And I was caught within it, a witness to the endless pause between what was and what could never be again. The choice before me was stark, to flee and perhaps forget this place, or to step deeper into the silence, to confront the echoes of lost moments and find a way to mend the broken thread of time before it unraveled me entirely. and fragile, like threads unraveling in the wind. The forest around me no longer breathed with the same stillness but pulsed faintly with a quiet vigilance, as if it were alive in a new way, watching, waiting, guarding. The weight of my new role settled over me, heavy yet inevitable. I was no longer just a wanderer lost in time's cruel loop but its reluctant sentinel, tasked with protecting others from the fate I had narrowly escaped. The echoes of the trapped souls lingered in my mind, their gratitude a bittersweet reminder of what had been sacrificed and what must continue. As twilight deepened and the first stars began to pierce the gathering darkness, I stood at the edge of the clearing, senses heightened to every rustle, every whisper of the night. The path behind me was no longer a prison but a boundary, a line I now had to defend, to ensure the silence did not fall again. And so I remained, caught between moments yet charged with purpose, a guardian of time's fragile gate, forever aware that some sacrifices are not endings, but transformations, a continuous dance of memory, loss, and eternal vigilance beneath the watchful trees. The weight of the unseen chorus hangs heavy around me, an ever-present hum beneath my thoughts. Each word I speak, each breath I draw, seems laced with echoes that do not belong to me alone. The walls of my car become a fragile barrier, barely holding back the relentless tide of those trapped voices from Blackwood Manor. At times, I catch myself staring into the rearview mirror, searching for a glimpse of the many selves fractured within that spectral mansion. Are they watching me still? Or have I become one of them, a voice lost among countless others, endlessly repeating, endlessly echoing through time? Yet, even in the shadow of this haunting, a flicker of defiance burns within. I write these words as both confession and plea, proof that I remain tethered to the world of the living, for now. A reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not in open fields but in the quiet spaces where sound bends and time distorts. And so, I carry this burden, an unwilling guardian of echoes, a witness to the thin line between presence and absence, reality and reflection. The manor waits for its next visitor, its next voice to claim, and I am left to wonder how long I can resist the pull to return. Because some places do not merely hold history, they consume it, folding the past into the present, weaving souls into the fabric of their eternal narrative. And I fear that my story, too, is becoming part of that never-ending echo.